Broadcast. Good morning, everybody. Order, order. Welcome to the Public Accounts Committee on Thursday the 13th of November 2025. As a chartered surveyor, and I declare that interest now, I know this country has some of the oldest and coldest homes in this part of the world. Therefore, the use of energy measures through insulation or technology can help significantly to lower energy and heating bills and provide the comfort of elderly and deprived residents. The Energy Company Obligation, ECO, is a government scheme intended to tackle fuel poverty and reduce carbon emissions in Great Britain. It requires energy companies to fund the installation of energy efficiency measures such as insulation. As of March this year, over 300,000 homes have been updated through the two current ECO schemes worth 4.2 billion. However, poor execution of these installations has done more than simply fail to deliver energy savings. Shockingly, between 22 and 23,000 households with external wall insulation fitted under the scheme, representing 98% of all external wall insulations, have defects. And between 9,000 and 13,000 homes with internal insulation are now in need of repair work to correct major issues that will cause problems such as damp and mould. By September 25, less than 3,000 of these homes had been remediated. This is an unacceptably small percentage of these installations are posing a real and immediate health and safety risks. Today's hearing will be split into two panels. In the first, we will be hearing from TrustMark and the United Kingdom Accreditation Service, UKAS, and the second panel will have a chance to hear from senior officials at DESNZ and Ofgem. And we will be examining the reasons for these faulty installations, including why they were not identified sooner, plans for remediation, and how government will ensure these failures do not happen in future. So, I welcome this morning Simon Ayers, MBE, the Chief Executive Officer. Simon has been the CEO at TrustMark since 2014, and after 3 decades of working in the energy and construction industries. On my right is Matt Gantley, sorry, Mike, Chief Executive of the UK Kingdom and Accreditation Service, the acronym UKAS. Prior to joining UKAS, he was Managing Director of the NQA certification and held senior directorship roles in certification training and consultancy firms. So a particularly warm welcome to you both, as it's your first times in front of the committee. I'm sure you'll be hoping you won't come here too often afterwards either. And a warm welcome to our guest from the Energy Security and Net Zero Committee, Bill Esterson. And I should also welcome our newest member, Rupert Lowe. We now introduce, we now move into questions. And the first question is, please, from Clive Bess.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Mr. Ayers, Mr. Gantley.
Good morning.
This scheme's, quietly awful, isn't it? Simply awful. Looking at the people out there who've suffered as a result of faulty installations. So, could you just explain to the committee very simply what your responsibilities are, your organisations, for this scheme, and how far you hold your hands up and say we were responsible for the failures as well? Mr. Ayers, do you want to go first?
Thank you. Our accountability for this scheme is based around the way TrustMark operates, which is we work through a series of scheme providers. Those scheme providers register businesses for TrustMark. We have, since 2005, been delivering within the home improvement sector. And that home improvement sector has obviously had ups and downs all the way through that period. Coming to the specifics to your question, we really started to recognise that there had been a change in delivery programmes. And I would like to put on record that the installation installed correctly is one of the best things we can possibly do to reduce the cost of the event. When we started to look at this scheme, we realised that a move from a single measure previous eco scheme, So previously, ECO had been installation of a loft, for instance, or cavity wall, normally on its own, to a multi-measure, probably low carbon and insulation scheme, which we had on ECO 4. We started to see that there were challenges in that delivery. And the reason you had challenges had been you had businesses that were then looking to manage multiples of outputs. So that would be not just installation, it could be low carbon, it could be electrical.
Wait a minute, so you just said when you realised, sorry, shouldn't you have realised before the scheme actually got operational?
Looking in hindsight, then yes, we should have looked and realised that the move from a single measure scheme to a multi-measure scheme would have had many complications in its delivery. We didn't recognise that at that point in time, but very quickly we recognised that there was a need for businesses to have a greater level of control over the multiple challenges that would come with retrofitting a property.
So you weren't involved in the design of the scheme, you were just given it after it had started, but basically to operate.
So, following the Each Home Counts review in 2018, well, 16 to 18, coming out of that was something called PAS 2035, which was a whole house approach. And our role was to oversee the delivery of that PAS standard. And that standard set the parameters for which a business should operate. And it's taken a period of time for the identification to see that not all those areas were being delivered.
We'll probably come back in it. Mr. Gantley, then, you're responsible for the scheme in the wider sense. So it's your responsibility, all this problem, is it?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify our remit and our role. If I can briefly just give you some short background to our role, our remit, and the oversight of UKAS itself and our connection with the certification bodies and, and then their connection, particularly with the installers. So first of all, UKAS is the United Kingdom Accreditation Service. Our role is to evaluate the conformance of testing, inspection, certification, calibration, validation and verification. Collectively, we refer to those as conformity assessment bodies. In the case of ECO, we accredit certification bodies. Those certification bodies evaluate according to relevant PAS requirements, in this case PAS 2030 and PAS 2031, that the installer has met the appropriate requirements, that they are competent to be able to undertake that installation. So simply put, there's three levels of that process. We accredit the certification bodies then certify those installers, but ultimately the responsibility for the quality of the delivery of the installation is with the retrofit installer. Just briefly about our background. So we're a self-financed, not-for-profit organisation, non-profit distributing. We operate under a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Business and Trade. We are a company limited by guarantee. We have 26 guarantors. They include the DESNZ, the Department of Business and Trade, Ministry of Defence, and many other different professional institutes and bodies which oversee the work that we do. We're also subject to oversight audits by the European accreditation bodies. Our last audit was
a lot of words there, Mr. Gantley. I think most
Yes.
people won't have an idea what you actually were doing. I'm sorry. I mean, in the end, what responsibility had you for this scheme? Were you involved in the design of it and the requirements to oversee it properly? Were you doing that from the beginning of the scheme?
Yeah, we've actually accredited the certification linked to ECO schemes since 2012. So previous iterations of ECO, which there was much lower levels of non-compliance. So we, in ECO 4 and the GBIS scheme, we accredited there's currently 8 certification bodies who certify the installers to PAS 2030, and there is also a standard called PAS 2031.
What was your role then in the failings that happened?
So what we do, we have a limited role. We don't have any direct connection with the installer or the retrofit coordinator. We don't have any sanction or produce any guidance or requirements for the installers or the retrofit coordinators. That's done by TrustMark. We don't monitor the installers and we don't monitor the retrofit coordinators. We assess...
What did you do? I'm sorry, it's very confusing, I think, for many people.
Yeah.
To understand, did you have any responsibility for this scheme in a meaningful way?
We have responsibility for assessing the certification bodies for initial application and then ongoing annual assessment of their conformance with the standards. So it's quite
if they're failing, then you're failing.
If the system hasn't functioned as it was designed, it didn't deliver the right outcomes, not necessarily because of the way in which it was designed, but the way in which there was understanding and of the risk at an installation level or a measure level or a design level. And when you look at the data that Atkins Realis analysed, it identified that there was a concentration of risk in specific installers or specific measures or in specific poor designs, and they should have been picked up much earlier in the process.
Sorry, it's just incredible what you just said. Yeah. You just said that it wasn't designed incorrectly, but it wasn't designed to properly assess the risks. Now, if the initial design doesn't properly assess the risks and where they are, then it's not designed properly, is it?
No, I didn't say it didn't design the risk, or if it did, I would correct that. The system is set up on a risk model, particularly the certification of the installers. There is a standard called PAS 2031 that is developed and published by the British Standards Institute, and that sets within it a risk model for the surveillance of the installers, and it's based on a risk model moving from 1% up to 10%. And so based on the risk profile, understanding the level of non-compliances in the installations, the certification body can increase the level of surveillance. However, the information that the certification bodies or scheme providers have of the risk is based on two things: their own assessment of those installers, as well as data that comes from the TrustMark database.
Right.
And and TrustMark's technical audit.
Which bit failed then? Was the risk wrongly assessed?
Two things, as highlighted in the NAO report, if I can just specifically quote from it. So there's two types of monitoring. It's just really important to understand the risk profile of these issues.
If you're going to quote the report, could you tell us where you're going to, which page,
which
paragraph?
Of course.
Yeah, thank you.
I will, Chair. So if you look at page 48 and clause 314, the NAO report says clearly there are two types of on-site inspection within ECO and ECO4 and GBIS that should pick up problems with the quality of the installations. These are the certification body risk-based audits that check measures installed meet the requirements of PAS 2030, and TrustMark's audit that check the projects lodged in its data warehouse meet the requirements of PAS 2035. So there's two inputs of data, what the certification bodies do and what TrustMark brings out through its technical audits. Those technical audits used to be done by Ofgem. They were passed to TrustMark. So they're the inputs into that.
Right. So, Mr. Ayers, then, is it your responsibility? Is that being passed over to you? Because somewhere between the two of you, there's a failing, isn't there?
My view on the non-compliances that we have now seen have come around, as I said earlier, that there had been a significant change in the scheme, and I would, as I said earlier, happily accept that we should have seen that the changes in that scheme created greater risk that should have been addressed at that point in time, and the scheme should have been designed at that point in time to accommodate that risk. For a number of reasons, we in 2019 picked up the technical monitoring, a transition from Eco 3 as it moved to Eco 4, the multi-measure scheme. And the multi-measure scheme also introduced the first concept of retrofit assessors and retrofit coordinators within the retrofit marketplace. In 2020, we built and launched the data warehouse that has been referred to. And at that point, we were taking single measure elements from the Eco 3 scheme before it moved to Eco 4. We should have recognised that risk, and I'm happy to accept that that is something that should have been addressed at that point in time. And we should have also recognised at that point in time that the level of data that would be collected, the level of installation and work that would be delivered should have been recorded, and there should have been more probably digital ways of then having the data insights from that to support those actions. That didn't happen due to a number of funding reasons, which obviously you would have seen in the report, until really we started to implement data analytics in the back end of 23 and then recognise that in 24. And the outcome you would have seen from the data analytics work and the implementation of a digital platform for auditing meant that we identified some differences in data that had been coming in. This was in early 24. We then moved to the point where we had data that we recognised we could start implementing more audits around the external wall installation, and that's where we moved to the point with the data and the knowledge of on-site to identify the risk we are talking about today.
Right, so at least there's a failing there you accept on your part.
Yes, I do.
Yes. Mr. Gantley, failing on your part?
I think we've fulfilled our role in the accreditation of the certification bodies, and we've done that throughout the process. I understand the issue and the scale of the issue and the problems that have been caused in the installation, but I must reiterate that there is 3 tiers within this system. There's the accreditation, and we accredit the certification bodies. The certification bodies then certify the installers. Those certification bodies are also TrustMark scheme providers. Then there's the installer and the retrofit
It's all somebody
coordinator.
else's fault.
Sorry.
It's
No,
all
it's
somebody
a
else's.
multi-tiered system, and those systems can work if there is a shared understanding of the mission and the risk that relates to it, and certainly
your
the shared
job to
data.
ensure that happened at the beginning and was available, that shared understanding.
What's important to reiterate is we don't monitor the market. We accredit the certification bodies, and it is our role to ensure if those certification bodies are not upholding their end of the bargain and not meeting the requirements of the standard, that we hold them to account, and we have sanctions to be able to do that. As soon as we are aware of this issue, which was raised to us in October last year, we announced, in close cooperation with TrustMark and the Building Safety Regulator and DESNZ and MHCLG, a series of unannounced visits of those certification bodies to see was there any issues within that certification process itself.
So, you waited for the problems to be announced to you before you actually went and analysed them?
Because at that point, those issues hadn't been highlighted to us at the scale. Can I mention? Sorry, there is an example here. In July last year, 2024, TrustMark had highlighted an issue relating to underfloor insulation. And the 4 bodies of UKAS, TrustMark, Ofgem and DESNZ worked together because of the risk that had been highlighted to communicate very clearly to the scheme providers and certification bodies, said there's an issue here, you need to be more vigilant of the assessment of those installers and the coordinators to it. So though the system, IT system, wasn't necessarily as functioning as well as Simon has already highlighted, there was still the management decision and intelligence to say, problem, let's deal with it collectively together. So at the point of October 24, the scale of the issues to do with EWI and IWI were not highlighted for our attention, but we then immediately undertook unannounced visits of those certification bodies, and then those certification bodies, through coordination with DESNZ, were requested to do a 20% audit of all of the installations that they'd undertaken. That's doubling what the top level of the high-risk installation surveillance would be, as defined by the standard. And we've continued those assessments of those certification bodies on a quarterly basis since. We don't monitor the market, we accredit the certification bodies at the top of the market. Those bodies are also scheme providers with TrustMark, they're registered with TrustMark, and those bodies have direct access through TrustMark to that data.
Mr. Gantley, we've heard a lot of words from you this morning. It is clear that this is a dreadful failure. People, elderly people, poor people, are going to be sitting there this Christmas with homes that got defects because of the system. Now, Mr. Ayers has taken a degree of responsibility and apologised for it. Do you apologise for your organisation's part in this whole affair?
Yes, we apologise for our role within this system. The system didn't function as designed. The system didn't ensure that where there was a risk, that was escalated through the process or shared within the system to make sure that appropriate action was taken by all members of the system.
Okay,
yes.
That's helpful. Thank you for that. I'm going to ask both of you. It was clear, I would have thought, from a much earlier stage than 2024. This thing started in 2022. Why did neither of your organisations recognise that there were serious problems much earlier than 2024? Because if you'd done that, we would have no doubt reduced the number of people who now have homes that have got defects. I'll start with you, Mr. Ayers.
Thank you. So in 2022, through our normal process, where we were auditing on site and desktop, where we identified any non-compliances, we would feed those back through the retrofit coordinator, and they would also go out to the scheme provider that had the responsibility for the business that was installing the work, with the basis that that was the route to get that remediated. That carried on, and we must remember that Eco4 ramped up very slowly because we would come out of a pandemic, we'd had all sorts of challenges in terms of delivery. As that ramped up, we were still feeding data back, but that data in some cases had been limited, and I accept that fact. But as the database became more suitable for a multi-measure scheme, it had been changed. We had new systems, new platforms put into place, digital platforms. We had a digital audit program put into place so that we could layer the exact auditing work on top of the work that had been lodged with us. And we then started to build the analytics. So it is no excuse. We were passing data on, but until we had that better oversight, that's when we identified the larger problem.
And the report makes quite clear, and I'm sure others will come in on this matter, that you didn't have the money to install these analytics systems. I understand that. But both of your organisations must have started to get complaints from consumers whose houses had all this misinstallation at a quite early stage, I would have imagined. Why did you not at that stage go to the Minister and say, or his department, and say, look, I think we've got a problem here. It's very early days, but it does seem we're getting too high a rate of complaints for the number of installations that have taken place. That must have happened, so why didn't you do that?
If I may come in, then we have regular meetings with the DESNZ teams, operational meetings on a Thursday. And in those operational meetings, we discuss many factors, including what some of our findings have been. And again, I think I take the responsibility for my organisation. We were probably remiss in not formalising that into those meetings at that point in time. But we were discussing the findings of our audit programme.
From a quite early stage?
That would have been from late 22 onwards.
Right. So the Ministry would have been aware from late 22 onwards, from the minutes of those meetings, that there was a problem.
And that's the reason I say that I have been remiss is there probably aren't minutes of those meetings, because they were informal operational meetings held on a weekly basis on a Teams call.
I've never heard of a government meeting that doesn't get minuted, but anyway, we will ask the Permanent Secretary about that. Mr. Gantley, can I ask you the same questions?
Yes.
When did you realise that things were going wrong, and why didn't you take some steps to do something about it?
Okay. We realised that the scale of the issue relating to EWI and IWI was at the point when TrustMark flagged that issue to us in October last year. We immediately responded by announcing a series of unannounced visits in coordination with DESNZ, so they were unannounced to the certification bodies, and since we've continued with a quarterly assessment programme of those certification bodies. Indicators before that date included, as you've highlighted, consumer complaints. There were a lower level of consumer complaints, and I can provide the committee with the numbers for those. Our process is to ensure that the consumer, if they complain to us about the activities of a certification body, we will investigate that with the certification body itself in the way that they're handling the investigation of the competence or the fault in the installation. So we are 3 steps away from the consumer, but we flag that immediately to the certification body an investigator on the on-site assessment or ask them through correspondence to deal with that specific issue. And we continue to do that.
You've got records which says you passed this on to TrustMark as soon as you started to
we passed it on to the certification body that we would have evaluated and asked them to justify and demonstrate what they've done to be able to deal with it. It might have been the first time that they've dealt with that, so we have full records of that, and I'm happy to show the committee the...
Yeah, if we could have that data, and if we could have the data from you, Mr. Ayers, what you actually said at those meetings. If there's no minutes of them, you must have a record yourself of what you said in those meetings.
We have agendas that we can demonstrate.
And you have agendas, so we would be very interested to see that. Our guest from the DESNZ committee, Bill Esterson, please.
Chair, thank you very much for inviting me along today and for allowing me to ask some questions. We took evidence from Mr. Ayers in our report retrofitting our homes. At that stage, the scale of this wasn't at the level we are now able to see from the NAO report. But problems with insulation aren't new. There's been scandal after scandal over spray foam, cavity wall, just to name two. We heard evidence about that in our inquiry. So I don't understand, Mr. Gantley, given what you said about risk earlier, why this wasn't a much higher priority for you when you were talking to the certification bodies and why you weren't carrying out the oversight on that basis.
Yeah, we were carrying out the oversight. So our process is we assess the initial competence of the certification body, and then we do an annual assessment. We also do a surveillance of their on-site activities. So we accredit those certification bodies. The next layer down is the certification bodies operate to the requirements of PAS 2030 and PAS 2031. They undertake a risk-based model according to that standard of the surveillance of the installers. So although in construction and many other sectors there are known quality issues, they're built into the design of the standards and requirements, whether they're the TrustMark operating requirements or the relevant PAS requirements. We don't set the standards, we assess the conformance of the conformity assessment bodies, the certification bodies delivering to the standards. We can't set a higher level, or we can't augment that standard, or we can't augment the scheme or change the scheme. That in the case of ECO, that's done by DESNZ. So we assess the conformance against that standard. May I just reference a specific point again from the NAO report in terms of our evaluation of the situation. So in reference back to the point I was making about the technical audits of TrustMark and by the certification bodies, on the whole we found through the evaluation of the certification bodies that they were competent in defining and conducting those surveillance audits against the relevant requirements of PAS 2031. But when you look at the risk-based model within it, when a new installer comes in, they come in at the lowest level, which is, in hindsight, looking at the data now, they should have been always put at the highest level. Now, but that's not a UKAS decision to make, but DESNZ have agreed that the new installers should go at the highest possible level.
Well, it might not be yours to make, but shouldn't it have been something you spotted and queried?
Yeah, we did. As soon as we were aware of the issue, we did raise the issue, and we recommended immediately that should be changed. And what we've done is we've produced a number of...
Was it changed?
It was changed, yeah.
And when was it changed?
It was in May, actually I think earlier than May, but we produced a technical policy in May this year. It's been updated in June, and a third version is now coming out in later this year.
So it's only been changed this year?
It only changed, but actually I think the policy had already kind of been put in place, because, at that point they were doing 20% audits anyway. So they were already above that level. That was the minimum level.
We're getting a bit into the weeds here. I mean, one of the suggestions to the DESNZ committee was that one of the problems was the short-term nature of the schemes meant that there was money left at the end of the period, and that the installers who were applying for the scheme weren't necessarily of the highest quality. Simon Ayers, have you come across that suggestion?
I think it's a very, very valid point, which is there are, to me, some fundamental issues. We have a competency issue on businesses delivering, and some of that's because we are seeing multi-levels of subcontracting through the business. So you have a business that may be certificated and PAS registered, operating through 4, 5, 6 levels of subcontracting, and that subcontracting loses any control as it goes down through that process. So that's one of those reasons. I think we have an incredibly complex ecosystem that is amazingly difficult to understand. We have a set of standards, so we have building regulations, we have PAS standards, and we have other standards sat in the middle that everyone is trying to interpret, and some of those are left to interpretation, not very clear guidance. So you almost are creating a storm where you have people that maybe are not fully competent, not fully understanding standards, delivering in a consumer's home.
And yet they're all certified, because they had to be certified to take part in the scheme.
They would be certified under the PAS business, and they would be a member of TrustMark through the scheme provider, which is a CB.
How could they be certified if their competence was questionable?
So the business would be certificated, but the use, then it's about the business using competent people to deliver, and that's where some of that had broken down. We were auditing the scheme, as UKAS would audit the CBs in a similar way to make sure that they were delivering.
Yeah, and just to clarify, your contention is that it's the lack of your resourcing meant you couldn't pick this sort of that level of problem up. Or
the level of resourcing is one aspect.
Scheme providers couldn't.
Yeah, the scheme providers. Yeah. The other is that it's a marketplace where subcontracting happens on such a broad nature, it's incredibly difficult to oversight. So the changes that I know DESNZ and ourselves and the sector have been talking about to bring in greater levels of control all through that programme to ensure that people are identified and can be held accountable in right the way through the chain is something we would definitely support.
Okay, now coming to the Eco4 challenge around it being a multi-measure scheme, wasn't it obvious that the same installers were unlikely to have the necessary competence to install all of the range of measures?
I think we initially, for the record, I must say there are retrofit installers out there that are incredibly competent and delivering very good work. And we shouldn't in any way forget those because they are improving people's lives. We do have a section where, through different funding that comes through the chain, have taken, I think, liberties with delivery. And that delivery through the competence issues, the standard issues, has meant that that's where we are at this point. So there is a breakdown in the delivery in the supply chain that is also, I think, fundamental to what we are or where we are today.
And same question to you, Mr. Gantley. Wasn't it obvious that there was going to be a problem here?
As soon as the issue of the scale of the issues were raised to us, we've responded to them. And that was demonstrated through the response we made to the underfloor insulation issue in July, and I can provide that letter to you. July last year.
Which year are we talking about?
Sorry, last year. And also, when we responded immediately to the scale of the issues that TrustMark had highlighted to us, we responded through this unannounced visits, the enhanced levels of surveillance, and we set through a number of major changes and recommendations for DESNZ to a degree that we would then put in an appropriate technical guidance for the certification bodies. And that included recommendations on subcontracting, as Simon has rightly highlighted, in regularising that, because the subcontracting and contracting again distills down or affects the potentially the quality of the installation itself. Also, it is vital to understand the link between the coordinator and the installer itself, because the coordinator's role is there from inception to implementation, from design to delivery and sign-off. And so the coordinator and the installer should ensure, because they're already evaluating to make sure that installation is done properly, that needs to be checked properly in that interface. We also made some changes.
We're going to need to keep. So can I ask for shorter questions, shorter answers? Because we're
Sure, I've got one. I would have thought that was blindingly obvious. I can't believe that wasn't already in place. But anyway, that's for your report, Chair. One final question for me at this point. Heat rises. Why was external internal wall insulation such a priority? Shouldn't it just have been loft insulation?
So under the UKAS scheme, with the multi-measure scheme, then loft was part of that delivery. So to ensure that we had a really...
So why was there so much wall, external internal wall insulation?
I think the complexity of delivering external wall and internal wall is far greater than that of delivering loft. But it generates a much better payback overall in a longer period of time. I think the challenge of being that we've already spoken about, which is the organisations or businesses had been delivering poor quality, which meant we didn't see that benefit. Installed correctly, it is a substantial benefit to the person that's living in the home.
Mr. Gantley, you were nodding when I said...
No, it's beyond our remit, that issue. The policy and the direction for government funding and prioritisation is not within our remit.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that wall insulation is expensive compared to loft insulation, though. So wouldn't it be better value for money to keep it simpler?
For me, the value should be the PAS 2035 standard is a standard about the whole house approach. And it's something that came out of the Each Home Counts review, which recognised that whether it be insulation or low carbon, you assess the house as a whole and you then install the best measures for that property. Hence the reason Eco4 was a multi-measure scheme. The idea being is... Are
you satisfied that the way the scheme was offering value for money, taking that whole house approach?
The scheme, if we had quality delivery, would have been a fantastic delivery, because actually you would...
Same question, is it?
The scheme, the Eco4 scheme, when you address a property with all the different measures, will ensure that those that we are trying to treat, which is on-fuel poverty, would have a property that would be a lower cost to run.
They would have had a lower cost to run with loft insulation.
Loft insulation is part of those measures.
Very simple question for you, Mr. Gantley, with a short answer. What date did you notify DESNZ that this auditing requirement of the worst and the best should be changed?
I can provide that with you. I don't have that at the top of my head, but there was a recommendation.
What's troubling me about all of your replies is why all of this took so long. Why we couldn't have acted much quicker. But anyway, never mind.
I can provide you with the...
Thank you very much. Sarah Green.
Thank you, Chair. I'm keen to hear from both of you in terms of your respective organisations, why you didn't collectively conduct sufficient audit and monitoring to ensure you had visibility of what was going on with these schemes. I'm happy for either one of you to go first.
Okay, so I don't use this as an excuse. We developed a system. That system came into play the back end of 23-24. We were already doing audits on EWI, IWI and other measures, not to a massive extent. As we went through that process and we had the data to support, we then recognised that there was a heightened risk, so we started to do more audit. This is in early 24. As we built that level of understanding and with the support of data analytics, we identified the greater risk, and we took that to DESNZ in September, October.
Can I just check, at what point did you realise you needed to do more monitoring?
That would have been it would have been probably, I don't know the exact date I can find, but it would have been June 24.
You mentioned earlier meetings that you were having with officials in the department as early as 2022.
Yep.
So there's a 2-year gap there.
The meetings we were having with the departments were operational meetings, which we have on a weekly basis. So we were feeding in our findings both about EWI but also other measures at the same time. That was a general update meeting. When we identified the issues in 24, we went...
Just to stop you. So in a previous answer, a colleague asked whether you were receiving correspondence from members of the general public raising concerns with you, and you did say, and I'm happy to be corrected if I've got this wrong, but you did say that you raised it informally within those operational meetings. So my question is, if that's the case, why did it take until 2024 for you to increase your level of monitoring?
So we started to identify from 22, it ramps up into 23. 23 to 24 was when we started to see the increase in the risk. We undertook more audits within TrustMark to identify there was a greater risk, and at that point we spoke to DESNZ, and that's where we then immediately undertook 1,100 audits in 2 months to identify whether it was a major risk or whether it was a minor risk. And we worked with DESNZ and Ofgem all through that process. So we did ramp up, but I think in hindsight, then the argument would be, was that sufficiently quick enough to do?
Thank you for that. I'll turn to you, Mr. Gantley.
So just to clarify again, our role is not to monitor the marketplace. That's TrustMark's role. What we do is we accredit the certification bodies. They then do themselves surveillance of the installers.
So given that, so earlier you did say that the system didn't function as designed, and that you believe that you fulfilled your role as an accreditation body, but that you are able to hold those certification bodies to account, which I think is what you said earlier. So I guess my question to you is, how is it possible that those certification bodies conducted the amount of audit required of them, but it was not sufficient to identify the widespread quality issues?
Yeah, it's a really important question. This is obviously an area of focus as well for the NAO and their investigation of that element of the surveillance itself. So there's two limbs of the monitoring of the market. The assessments that TrustMark did, as Simon's already highlighted, at the end of last year, they scaled that up significantly when they were... What's
your organisation's role in that? If you can hold those certification bodies to account, how do you do that?
There's a number of ways in which we do the assessment. So it's initial assessment and then unannounced assessment. We don't tell the assessment body we're going to do it, we just turn up. We can increase the level of surveillance of those certification bodies. If we see any problems of lack of conformance to the standards, we will always raise findings. And then we can take sanction against them. That could be suspend them or entirely withdraw the accreditation. Withdrawal means they're out of that market completely. Suspension means they can no longer conduct new certification activity, but they will maintain the existing conformity assessment that they have in place. So it's an important sanction because it affects the way in which they operate in the market. So going back to the point on monitoring, so TrustMark does the monitoring, the technical monitoring that Ofgem used to do, that was passed to TrustMark to undertake, and then there's the certification bodies. They certify the installer and they monitor on a sample. That sample of surveillance is over a 12-month period or 16 months. This is all clearly defined in this PAS 2031, which we're going to present to the panel. They did that on a risk-based approach. It's clearly defined how that's done, but they do it based on intelligence, and that intelligence comes from the number of installations from the installer. The installer has to tell the certification body the number of installs they're doing. In addition, every one of those installations goes onto the TrustMark database. So TrustMark can present that data to the certification body. It helps them do their risk model. In addition, TrustMark can highlight to the certification body, they're also scheme providers, that they see a specific risk. So they can then increase the level of surveillance of that certification body from 1 to 10%. And as I've highlighted before, because of this issue was raised, it will enter 20%. So our role is ensuring that the certification bodies are following that model as a highlighted area based on our findings. And actually, I'll quote again from page 49 of the NAO.
Can we just appeal for shorter answers, Mr. Gantley? We're really running over time now. I think, Sarah, have you got any more questions?
I guess my question is, why didn't it work? But I don't think I'm going to get an answer.
I can give you, obviously, this system should have worked. It was
didn't it?
Well, a number of different things. It's complex, as Simon has highlighted, but there are many complex systems that work perfectly well. They function perfectly well within specific marketplaces. So what I think the way in which systems should work is should be a clear vision and a shared mission of what should be achieved. I think in many cases that exists here, but there wasn't shared intelligence, and the data on what was happening on the ground, what was being coordinated by a retrofit coordinator or signed off by a retrofit coordinator, and what was being installed and what was going wrong from the TrustMark audits didn't feed back into, or the complaints from consumers didn't feed back into a model that says this is high risk. And when you look at the
I don't understand why it wasn't considered high risk before it was even started.
It didn't, yes, it did.
Why, you are experts sitting there, why didn't you point this out to DESNZ, that this model was far too complex, it was doomed to failure from the start? You're both experts. Why didn't you point all this out before it started, not long after it had begun?
As soon as we were aware of the issue, we pointed out and recommended that there should be a higher level of risk assessment, and those installers that had caused those issues should be suspended. There was actually, in the Atkins Realis data, there's quite a clear indication that the majority of the installations were down to poor design.
Okay, well, we've got the picture. Sarah, you finished?
I'm good, thank you.
Anna, briefly,
I'm
please.
going to keep it very short, and I'm just going to address my questions to Mr. Ayers, if I may. Thank you, Chair. Obviously, as constituents, we all have many households who have had these problems with both the external wall installation and the cavity wall installation. Shoddy work. They're sitting there in cold and damp homes. They're now being told that the same installers should be coming back to fix their problems. So what assurance can you give to constituents like mine who are in these situations that they can trust the installers that cause the problems to come back and retrofit?
We are working with DESNZ and Ofgem now to look at all the work that's been undertaken. So there is a term find and fix challenge. That find and fix will be delivered by TrustMark in conjunction with the department. We will be offering audits to all properties, and then we will have a direct level of oversight to ensure that work is corrected. We would always ask that the consumer allows the installer that first opportunity to return with a level of control, because we will now oversee the remediation directly. So that will be TrustMark and TrustMark delivered from directly in our business. So we are not then pushing it through others through that route. We would want the business, who should be accountable for the work that they've delivered, to correct it in the first place, because that's about them taking the accountability and responsibility and the cost of putting that right, not that cost being passed on to others. And we will also support in terms of the Find and Fix programme is looking at how we will do local engagement, we will support communities in those areas, and we will bring people in to do that. So that it's a difficult question, but we are trying to protect and ensure the consumer has a level of comfort they haven't currently got.
I'm not sure that will give much comfort, particularly given that this 25-year guarantee and the sort of 20,000 limit that's supposed to be in place. We know that quite a lot of these retrofitted businesses just do not have the insurance to sort of themselves, and they haven't got appropriate cover in terms of these liabilities, and so many of them are just going to go bust, aren't they? And then so that's one problem, is they're going bust. And then the other is that a lot of the work, these so-called installers, was all subcontracted, and it was the subcontractors who were doing the shoddy work, and they're not the ones that are even registered with you, and those subcontractors are just popping up with other installations. So the system is so broken that I'm really not confident that using the same installers, albeit with a little bit more oversight from the same body who failed to check up on these installers in the first place, is going to give people trust and confidence. So can you say more about how are you mitigating those risks?
We have a record when any work is lodged under the Eco4 scheme. We have a record of the warranties that are put in place. This is the £20,000 warranty that is required for a 25-year. 20,000 cover for the 25-year warranty. So we have those, and we have the records of when they were issued, what they were issued for, and who's issued them. So a business will be given that first chance to put the work right. If they cease to trade, but also if they fail to remediate, which is a clause that does exist, then we will go back and work with the warranty provider to make sure that that work is corrected. So there is a risk businesses will cease to trade, but we have a level of protection that we can also sit behind that. We have a number of challenges with the businesses, as you say, that use contractors, but we hold that business responsible. And we are concerned in what we are seeing, and I'm sure one of the questions, if there'd been time, would have been about phoenixing. Because some of these businesses...
That's what I'm asking about.
Yeah.
I'm saying popping up elsewhere.
Phoenixing, so we are now tracking, and we are using better systems with a watch list to identify directors within companies, looking for trends now, and we can then stop that business operating until they have remediated or funded the remediation for all the work they've left.
I mean, we've had companies housing before, and I have to say I wasn't very confident that they had the data to prevent phoenixing. So how are you working with companies house to
so
track
we
these
work
businesses?
we don't have a direct link with Companies House, and that's something that we should be looking at, as with the insolvency agency. But we run a watch list through the installers. We have records of lodgement. We can look for trends, and we look for the intel that we get from other businesses as well.
And I really want to push on this point of these liabilities. I don't know whether it is under this scheme or prior schemes, but the whole scandal about people then having... I mean, you're saying you didn't know about the problems, but certainly some dubious law firms did, because they were knocking house to house in areas like mine, finding people who had faulty cavity insulation. And they have then gone bust because there's been counter-suing. So the idea that some legal process, that insurance is going to be the route for these consumers to get back, we're talking, thousands and thousands of pounds in some cases to get their houses put back in order. I don't know if you want to speak to that situation. I mean, SSB law is the particular one that's also provided evidence, the victims of them, and I have constituents, and they're being hounded for additional funding for that.
Yeah, and I am aware of the organisations that have gone into the marketplace looking to the no-win, no-fee style scenario. Yeah, what we are offering, and we want to remediate the Eco4 scenario, is that in find and fix, we will support through that process, so that we will work with all the organisations to get the work remediated to leave that person where they should have been in the first place. We will, I'm sure, have lots of challenges from lots of areas, but we are using the community engagement that we need to use so that there is a trust built, because we do have key hotspot areas that we are looking to work within, and we are bringing external people in to support us in that process. So we believe if we have a controlled remediation programme, then hopefully I can instill some confidence back into that.
Can I finally just check then, have you already communicated with consumers so that they don't become susceptible to these no-win, no-fee lawyers? Do they know to hold out?
Ofgem have been communicating, and there will be more communication. And when we work in the areas, we will work with all the local councils, local authorities to ensure that people are made.
Could you write to the committee, please, and just tell us what you've communicated with consumers to make sure they are not susceptible to further exploitation and fraud? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Well done. Rupert Lowe.
Well, thank you. First of all, Chairman, I should declare my potential conflicts of interest in the various disclosures that I've made to the committee. So they're businesses I'm now a non-exec director of, but I don't think they've been involved in this particular part of the curve, but they do contracting business. So, yes, I'm intrigued, Simon, about whether TrustMark, as part of its certification, did you check the balance sheets and liquidity and sustainability of the businesses that were executing this business? Question one. Have you actually analysed the insurance contracts and the wordings of the insurance contracts to ensure that there aren't excesses and other complex issues which are going to mean they're not deliverable? It does seem to me, as the chairman said, that this is a complete mess, and I mean, you two are under the scrutiny here. But the question I've also got for you is, you've mentioned minutes which may or may not exist. You mentioned that the agendas exist. We don't know whether the minutes exist. Do you feel that the oversight of this from the state is partly to blame? I mean, I think, Matt, you mentioned it's over complex. So it does seem to be from top to bottom a mess. Do you think the complexity of it comes from a lack of the right hand knowing what the left hand is doing within the state departments that you've been dealing with?
But should we just stop there, because you've lots of questions. Could you firstly deal with the issue of balance sheets, liquidity, insurance cover and so on, because it does seem that if these poor people are going to get any remedy, we need to have some assurance about the insurance schemes that are in place.
So to become a TrustMark registered business, you have to be registered through a scheme provider. That has a requirement called the Framework Operating Requirements, and there is a whole annex that is devoted to checking that the business is suitable. That includes identification of any previous businesses, company's house, etc., whether you've been struck off. We don't do a full dive into the liquidity and the financial stability of that business at that point.
So it could be a new code.
If it's a new code, then there is a period of time, and that varies depending on the schemes, before they can actually come into it. In most cases, that's 6 months trading before they're allowed to come into that area of work.
And Rupert's final question, oversight by DESNZ. Do you feel that the oversight by DESNZ, and please be candid, I know there's people in the audience from the department, but please be candid with that answer.
Insurance as well, Jeffrey.
Oh yes, can we just hear about the insurance?
Right. So can I deal with the insurance first?
Yes, of course, please.
With the insurance, we have worked now with all those that are providing policies. We have a financial protection panel that assesses the policy, but we have also now engaged directly with them to look at the content of the policy to ensure that there is remediation that can be delivered to those
You
properties.
say now, but it's not now, is it? It's when the scheme was running.
Well, we've been looking at it for probably over 12 months to ensure that they're covered. Prior to that, then there is a financial protection panel that reviewed the suitability of the warranty, and that was run by external independent members to ensure that it was suitable for delivery.
Which insurance company is standing behind most of this?
There are 3 organisations that provide the bulk of the warranties, and that would be the Safe World Insurance Company, it would be Swiga, and it would be the IAA. Some are regulated, some are not regulated.
And to Rupert Lowe's final question, oversight by the department, and I would appreciate a candid answer, please.
So, to the point where we had the internal report by DESNZ, we had good communications with DESNZ, and there had been oversight, but I think the oversight probably hadn't recognised the enormity of what the delivery had been. Since this point, we now have formal terms of references in place. We have a memorandum of understanding. We have a DESNZ senior official on our board as an observer, and we document every single meeting with minutes formally to ensure that everything is now recorded.
Just 1 or 2 final questions from me. That final answer just strikes me a little bit as stable doors and horses bolting, but anyway, never mind, we'll leave that there. I think one of the purposes of this hearing today is to try to provide some reassurance for those poor people who are living in houses that are not up to standard, as to any sort of timetable when you think that virtually all of them should be properly remediated.
We are commencing the mobilisation now to be able to do the audits to identify the remediation and then phase and risk-base that remediation, because we want to address the worst risk first. My belief is that programme is probably going to be a 12 to 15 month programme. We have implemented technology in the terms of triage tools to help consumers that could put photographs and documents in to assess the level of risk and help us level risk, so we can then triage to the point where we are addressing where there could be system failures before we address.
So the answer to the question is 12 to 15 months.
That's
in
for the
most
audit,
cases.
sorry. Can I just clarify, is that just for the audit?
That's
the
also
actual
remediation. We intend to drive remediation, and in most cases there is we're looking at creating a time period for that to happen within.
You've been helpful today, thank you for that. I've got one final question. and it's something that really worries me, that the NAO report says that the department is considering extending these schemes still further. Would you recommend that they are stopped at the end of their current period and the whole scheme is reassessed before recommencing?
I would be against any schemes ceasing to exist on the basis that they are delivering in fuel poverty. What needs to happen is that there is a better level of consumer protection and oversight provided.
Mr. Gantley, briefly.
Yeah, I think that government policy on funding is beyond our specific remit.
No, not the funding,
No.
but the extension of the schemes.
There certainly needs to be a review, as you've highlighted, particularly of all of the different roles within it and the complexity of those processes, especially between the retrofit coordinator and the installer, and ensuring there's much better oversight and risk analysis from the TrustMark technical audit through the certification bodies, then to the intelligence to say this installer, this measure, this design is causing problems. That needs to be fixed. And actually it does need reform to do that. There's already major changes that have addressed those issues. So that needs to continue.
Rupert Lowe, last word.
Well, very quick one. You obviously are aware of the wording of the insurance policy. Can you assure the committee that if there are downstream health issues from mould, which, as you know, can not only have they got the issues of the building work, it can create health issues. Do those insurance policies cover health issues downstream from this malpractice?
I would need to go back and double check that with the warranty providers for consequential.
Would you let us have a note on that very important question? Can I thank you both very much? It's clear when a scheme like this is got such problems, it was going to be a difficult session, but can I thank you for coming, and can I thank you for trying your best to answer our probing questions. Order. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome to the public accounts today on the and I would be most grateful if you would be, first of all, introduce all of yourselves, starting with you, Permanent Secretary Jeremy Pocklington, please.
I'm Jeremy Pocklington, I'm the Permanent Secretary, Department for Energy Security and Net Zero.
Jonathan Brearley, CEO of Ofgem.
I'm Kiera, Schoenemann, the Director for Audit and Compliance in the Schemes Administration arm of Ofgem.
I'm Clive Maxwell, I'm the second Permanent Secretary in the department.
And Deborah, Chittenden, Director in the Buildings Group within DESNZ.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for attending today. Permanent Secretary, having read this report, I've been on this committee for 12 years. I think this is the worst finding I've had of any of these reports, and I've read nearly 1,000 in that 12 years. Why wasn't the scheme designed in a simpler way, and why was it altered from the previous schemes which worked? I have a very simple dictum in this place. For any new laws, any new schemes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So why was it redesigned in this way?
This is a serious report, and the thing I want to say at the outset is my thoughts are with the families and the households that have been affected by this. Ministers are absolutely clear. We need to identify, we need to fix the problems, and we need to change the system for the future. Let me come to the question that you've asked. With hindsight, I think the root cause of the challenge that we have here is that too much change was introduced at the same time, both to the scheme and to the oversight regime as well, at a time when the sector was also changing. You asked to start with the scheme. The origins of this scheme of Eco4 come from the fuel poverty strategy in 2021, when a policy decision was taken to focus on deep house retrofit and if you like, the worst, the most challenging homes that could receive the greatest benefit from the sorts of measures that we are talking about today. That is obviously a change from the previous schemes that we had that were more successful and had a much better rate, although I'm sure we can come on to talk about those, that obviously we need compliance rates need to be good for every scheme. Ultimately, that was a policy decision. It's also about the progress, reflected the progress that had been made over that period. Mr. Esterson asked previous witnesses about, essentially, should we lag more lofts? The reality is we have already made great progress on our housing stock with actually lagging lofts. Where we had got to by that stage was the point where the best impact that could be had, was the decision at the time, was that by moving to deep house and whole house retrofit.
So the reason that I say the findings in this report are so dire, and it's probably the worst I've seen in 12 years on this committee, is nicely summed up on paragraph 2.2 on page 29, and that tells us that 98% of the external cladding was wrong, and this involved a staggering 22 to 23,000 houses. To have a government scheme where 98% is wrong is surely absolutely negligence, isn't it, on behalf of the department?
This is unacceptable, what has happened on this scheme, and there were failures at every level of the system, poor installation by installers, poor oversight by certified bodies. You've heard from TrustMark and UKAS in the previous hearing, but the department did not oversee these schemes in the way that they should have done. You talked about 98% failure. I think it is worth just talking a little bit about the failures and what that level of non-compliance, what that actually involves. It does involve a range of issues, and I think it is important to set out the spectrum of issues that we're talking about within that number. This is actually a range from, for example, not getting the full benefit of a measure, for example, from gaps in external wall or internal wall insulation, through to more serious failings that either have caused or have the potential to cause damp and mould, and I do not want to underestimate the importance of that. That is, for example, caused from the incorrect alignment of insulation with the eaves of a property. Poor sealing is another way that that can be caused. And then the most serious category 1 errors, which do impose immediate risk to health and safety. For example, leaving an exposed wire. I'm sure you've all seen these issues. The majority were at the mid to the lower end, but there were far too many serious failings, and I do not want to detract from the terrible experience that some households have faced with the more serious issues. That is why we need to fix the problem.
And there's not only these 22 to 23,000 exterior, there's about 9,000 interior. So there's a very large number of people out there.
Indeed.
And the number that have been remediated so far is very small. So the one thing we need to do from this morning's hearing is to give some reassurance to all those people who are going to be sitting over their Christmas lunch with houses that have defects, is how we can most quickly remediate those. And if the guarantees don't work, and it sounded from the previous hearing as though the guarantees are going to be very tricky, will the taxpayer stand behind all those people that have got defected homes and also suffer subsequent loss, as Mr. Lowe has so rightly pointed out, health and safety losses from the defects, mould and so on. Down the line, we find that they have health problems.
The importance of this is something that the department is taking very, very seriously. The latest management information that I have is, I think, now just a bit over 4,600 homes have been remediated. Just a little bit over 50%, but it's not high enough. And where we are now it's a little bit higher than in the report, but it's not high enough. And where we are now is beginning the next phase, which is the scale up that we need to see, and that's why we're launching the Find and Fix programme to tackle the problems. Again, as you have started to hear about from your previous witness in the last hearing, Ofgem will shortly be writing to the households affected from external wall insulation through the Eco Forward, the GBIS scheme, to begin that process. We need to progress through that rapidly. You've then coming on to, forgive me, there were several questions there. Can I carry on through the different questions? Which is we can discuss further pace and what we need to do there. You then come to the question of who pays and how we manage that. And again, there were questions in the previous hearing around that. We've thought hard about this. Our starting point is that installers who have been paid for work that is not up to standard need to fix the problems that they have that they have created, and that is what a big part of the response has been to date. We can come on to talk about this and unpack this further through this hearing. We are monitoring this closely. Many installers have responded to, for example, being suspended, to the demands from the system to fix the properties. And actually, we are seeing evidence that the system is making progress with remediation. As I say, more than half of the properties identified to date have now been remediated, but we need to identify and we need to fix the remaining properties. You're then coming on to there's lots of questions here. Should I continue?
I'm perfectly happy you answered.
Then coming on to the next level of the question, which is who pays, what happens if the installer is no longer operating, and you asked the previous witness the question. So some of this comes back to the system that was put in place following the Each Home Counts review. That system was introduced following a lot of engagement with industry. A lot of work was done on that system, created the single quality mark. That was a role given to TrustMark. Ultimately, that system is still too fragmented and needs to be changed for the future. So we're not, just to be very clear, the department is not content with the system that we have today. We need to make immediate short-term improvements while we can, but we need to fundamentally look at the system for the future. But as part of those changes, that's when the guarantee requirement came into place. The guarantee providers are supervised by a financial protection panel. That guarantee provides assurance for work up to £20,000. Now, our analysis suggests that the vast majority of works for external wall insulation will be below well below £20,000. But then, to continue down this journey, the next question that you're asking is what happens to those cases where the costs are higher than £20,000? And again, we can come on, unpack that in more detail. What we are doing is we are working hard to drive the system for all parties in the system to come together to identify bespoke solutions to these most challenging cases in a way that remediates those properties so that consumers aren't left suffering and those problems are fixed. We can come on to talk about that. We are finding success with that approach. For example, in a high number of properties in the Luton area, and Deborah has a team that is leading on that work. Because behind that is the alternative approach, which would have been to say, actually, we're going to actually just stop the system, introduce a new supply chain, the taxpayer funds that. Well, the problem with going down that approach is the system would walk away and installers would not take liability and not remediate the problems that they have created. And that is not the approach. And I also think it would take longer. And I think the thing that is in the consumer's best interests is to remediate these problems as quickly as we can, properly oversee that, and then design a new scheme for the future.
Because it was a long answer, but it didn't really answer the question. And it's this. In the last resort, if the installer isn't there, or they're incapable, who is going to pay for this? And this is not a cost-free system even to date, because we all, as consumers of electricity, are paying for all of this. So at the last resort, can you give us a guarantee, and more particularly, give those that are sitting in a house which has got serious defects today, that they will not be out of pocket, and they will not have to resort to legal measures, to all the ombudsman to get remediation, that your department will stand by and do the right thing and make sure their houses are remediated?
So the direct answer, if the installer is not there, the guarantor is liable
if the guarantor
for this.
Also is not
ministers,
there.
Well, the guarantors are there.
Well,
the ministers have been ministers are very clear, though, just very clear that these problems need to be fixed at no cost to consumers who've done nothing wrong. We will talk more about the good work that is happening, bringing parties together to deal with these most difficult cases. But I will say, obviously, we closely monitor this, and we will continue to work to find those solutions for the most challenging cases.
Not quite answering the question. Who is going to pay in the ultimate if the installer is there or not capable? And we heard, I don't know anything about these insurance companies, but they're now going to be facing very large numbers of claims. I don't know how they're going to be, whether their balance sheets are strong enough to withstand those or not. But if the insurer, for one reason or other, is not there, the installer is not there, how is the individual householder going to get his or her house remediated?
We have, so ministers are clear, we will need to fix this. We have, so far, for the most difficult cases, found solutions by bringing together the relevant parties in the system. If there are some of these very difficult cases where there is no installer and the guarantor, well, the guarantor is there, but the guarantee is up to £20,000 for 25 years, if you have heard. It's then the remaining very small number of cases where we are identifying bespoke solutions.
Who's going to pay for that
We are bringing all parties of the system together to do that.
You're still not answering the question. You're bringing all parties. What are the parties? Because you can't expect other installers to go in and do the remediation work and not be paid. So what are all the parties?
Certified bodies, for example. Deborah may want to say a little bit more about the parties and how we're bringing them together and how that is solving these difficult cases.
All I want to know on behalf of the consumers who've got these problems is who is going to pay. And can we, as a result of this hearing today, be absolutely assured that somebody is going to pay, but not the poor consumer who's living in a house that has a problem?
To that direct question, our ministers are clear that yes, we need to find a solution that means that consumers do not pay. What we are doing is driving the system to find those solutions.
And at the moment, apologies, Chair. So we are finding at the moment that the system is working. So I think I completely understand your question, but I hope you also understand the reasons for us to pursue the system as the primary route to resolve these issues. It is the right thing to do. And I will say that, I have personal conversations with all parts of the system every week. And I will say the collaboration that we are seeing, genuine collaboration across the key parties here, is very encouraging. And I will say, Simon Ayers, you met in the previous panel, and I speak very regularly. We are trying to put in place a more robust case management process, which therefore allows us to make sure that the difficult cases are handled very carefully, that we know exactly what is happening with those individuals, and that we are, between us collectively, the department, TrustMark and the certification bodies and the guarantors, genuinely pulling every possible lever we can. And I will say at the moment, we are not resorting to guarantees in any significant numbers. The installers are remediating the work. So I think it's really important. I want to give you some confidence that that is what is happening, because I speak with those installers. You will remember, I think, that we took, TrustMark and the certification bodies took immediate action to suspend quite a large number of the installers once we identified the extent of these problems. It's quite an important and relevant point. That constituted for external wall 81% of the market. That was really significant. I don't need to overplay that for those of you involved in the sector. Since then, actually what we've seen is 22 of those 38 have come back on and have been fully reinstated. There's a lead spokesperson for that group with whom I met very recently, in fact, only last week or the week before. He fully accepts the issues that were there and has, in his company, fully remediated the problems that have been identified. He speaks for the group of those suspended installers that they really want to remediate these problems. They accept the problems, by and large. There are a couple of those companies that have withdrawn from the market, and we can talk to that. But those that have stayed are committed to resolving these problems with us, as are the insurance companies. They are sitting side by side with us. Every week they're in meetings with me, talking to exactly what they are, looking at what calls have been made on their guarantees and working on how they can help find solutions constructively for households. We are all committed to the consumer at the end of the day.
Deborah, thank you for that answer, and I want to make it absolutely clear that neither I nor this committee would want to let any installer off the hook. So you are right to pursue them as a first port of call. What my thrust of my question is what's going to happen if neither they nor the insurer are there, and to be sure that the poor consumer doesn't end up paying.
And I think the answer to that is, as Jeremy has explained, that ministers have been very clear with us. We understand what they've been clear with us about. We will be pursuing this. And as and when we find cases where we get to a place where we don't have a solution, we will be reverting to ministers with options.
Thank you. Bill Esterson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask some questions about the lessons that have hopefully been learned by now. Mr. Pocklington, you talked about the 2021 fuel poverty strategy and that a policy decision was taken to move to a whole household approach. Who advised this change?
It's normal practice not to discuss the detail of exactly advice to ministers in hearings such as this. So I'm not sure I can say more about exactly.
Was it from outside the department?
I don't have. I'm afraid I don't have all the details in front of me of exactly the steps and the reviews that led up to the 2021 review.
Okay, but
Clive, do you have any more?
May I just come in? The one thing I would say is that some of the points that Jeremy made earlier about, for example, the fact that many of the loft spaces in the country have been insulated, and therefore to make incremental or bigger improvements to the energy efficiency of the housing stock, I think that sort of the statistics around that are well accepted within the wider market.
Sure, but to the question I asked in the first panel, was that good value for money, given that wall insulation is expensive?
It's expensive but effective. And ultimately, if we are addressing the building stock of this country, which I know many of you will know far better than I, is incredibly poor, then we are going to have to take some expensive measures to bring that building stock up to the necessary levels for warmth.
The one thing I would add is external wall insulation is more complicated. The track record of our capital schemes is different, and I think shows that there are circumstances where external wall insulation can be introduced into properties in a way that is beneficial.
Okay, look, I don't want to spend too long on that. You said also you didn't oversee this. Why not?
As I said, I think there were failures at every level of the system. I include the
ultimately your responsibility.
I include the department in that. We should have overseen this. Sorry, can I
make this point to you? You're the permanent secretary. Ultimately, you with ministers have responsibility. This was very high profile. Were you not giving it the attention that it deserved?
We should have given it more oversight. I'm very clear about that. Now, there are contextual factors. In the second half of 2022 and a lot of 2023, what was the overwhelming focus of the department? Delivering the £40 billion worth of energy support schemes associated with the energy crisis following Putin's invasion of Ukraine. That is actually where a lot of time and attention was during that time. But ultimately, I don't want to take away from the fact that there should have been more questions asked. We didn't receive a sort of, if you like, a substantive escalation from the system, but ideally, and I think that is the lesson of the department, is even when schemes are set up at some distance from the department, like this scheme, we need to have stronger oversight.
Okay, and given that there have been problems with insulation for decades, I mentioned spray foam and cavity wall in the first panel, why didn't you foresee the need for this level of oversight, and why didn't you look at the regulatory system that we heard described as being inadequate in the first panel?
Well, so this is where you come into the other change that's happening at the same time, which is, as well as the new policy, there is a new regulatory and consumer oversight and consumer protection system that is being introduced following the Each Home Counts review of 2016. This is sort of, many members of the committee will be aware of this, Peter Bonfield's review. That involved a lot of work.
2016. We're now in 2021.
It took a number of years to implement. That's when the review came out. It took a number of years to implement the scheme. Industry was engaged through that process. There was an expert panel supporting on that process. The central recommendation of Peter Bonfield's review, there's a lot in, sorry, I don't want to interrupt him, of the Each Home Counts review, a lot of very good things in that review, introduced with good intentions, but having a single quality mark for these schemes, that was a role that was subsequently given to TrustMark, introduced higher standards, PAS 2035 is the sort of key standard for multi-measures in homes, and introduced the requirement for guarantees. So a lot of good things about that, but, and figure 4 of the report sets this out very clearly, ultimately, the system that was introduced went alongside and with the grain of the system of standards that we have in the UK, and it was based on a system of licensing and certification, accreditation and certification, as you've heard in the previous hearing. That is a decentralised model that relies on social enterprise, it relies on the private sector to oversee schemes such as this.
So why go? Sorry to interrupt you, but it's important.
It is important.
So why go for an arm's length quality assurance scheme, the one you're describing?
I think I've tried to explain why that decision was taken to the best of my understanding. It was taken quite a long time ago now. It was designed to strengthen the
2016 review. Is what you're saying.
Okay. It was designed to strengthen the consumer protection regime. It goes with the grain of how standards are overseen over many decades in this country, but creates that sort of single quality mark. Right. Stood here today, this is too layered, it is too fragmented, it is too complicated, and has not provided the protection that consumers deserve. Our ministers are clear. We need to fix this for the future. We have taken immediate steps to strengthen oversight and scheme, again, some of which you heard at the previous hearing. But this regime is not appropriate. The final factor, if I can, was these changes to the system of oversight and to the policy scheme took place against a very challenging delivery environment. And I think just to prevent the full picture to the committee, it is important that is a factor. I think changes in working practices through COVID, the impact of inflation following the energy crisis, all put pressure on the supply chain and on those oversight bodies. And those things came together to create the problems that we are talking about today.
Permanent Secretary, just excuse me a minute, Bill. That's not really a good enough answer, all those excuses, is it? Either the department had to have overall responsibility for oversight, or the regulator had to have one or the other. And why did you give the main oversight to a body that had never done anything on this scale before, didn't have the resources to be able to do the audit and follow up that it was asked to do? So why did you not, either the department in charge of this or the regulator, and I don't know which one of you answers, but one of you should have had the overall oversight of this, and it seems to me that neither of you did.
So each home counts led to actually Ofgem, the responsibility for regulating these schemes being taken essentially away from Ofgem and given to the system in Figure 4, led by TrustMark.
Ofgem have got a sort of didn't have the resources. You should have known that.
So the department took some steps, but with hindsight, didn't take enough steps to ensure that TrustMark was set up to deliver appropriately. If you look at the record, the department is taking action. With TrustMark, it establishes new board, proper independent governance and oversight of TrustMark. It actually loans TrustMark money as well to build its capacity. Again, this is a scheme designed not to be delivered through taxpayer funding. It's designed to be delivered through a supplier obligation. But the report is clear. More should have been done. More modelling should have been done, for example, about the capacity that was going to be needed to oversee a scheme of this complexity. TrustMark have built that capacity, but it wasn't there at the start.
Let's bring in the regulator.
Yeah, I mean,
what did you know about this scheme? Were you getting complaints? What representations did you make to the department that things were going wrong?
So it may be worth, well, first of all, saying we recognise the seriousness of what's happened and the circumstances in which families find themselves. But it may be worth outlining what our job was here, which I think is different to both our normal regulatory role and indeed our role in other parts of our scheme delivery. So unlike both our regulatory role and indeed some schemes where we do all the compliance and auditing, here we have a much narrower function, which we sort of describe as technical accountants. Kiera, do you want to take us through those specific functions?
Yeah, sure. So I think it's also just important to say the role of energy suppliers here, because our role is directly to interface with them. Energy suppliers are set specific volumes of obligations, so specific sets of measures that they need to deliver. As Jonathan says, we perform a technical accountancy, if you will, to ensure that every measure that they deliver does meet the required standards and that they're able to evidence that to us. So, for example, we've approved measures on 820,000, we've approved 820,000 measures from energy suppliers to date. For each and every single one of those, we perform a range of checks. We, as Jonathan said, do not directly perform quality assurance checks. So in this case, some of the evidence that a supplier will provide to us is that the quality standards have been met as certified by TrustMark. We also provide some additional functions. So for example, we provide technical expertise responding to eligibility criteria or queries about that. Is this measure eligible? It's a sort of novel. We help industry work through that. And then more recently, as you'll have seen in the NAO report, in response to these issues, we have stepped in to support government colleagues with the Audit program through Atkins Realis. So the findings in the report you have seen. We established a contact centre to support consumers, and we issued letters to all 60,000 homes impacted. But again, just what our role is not, it is not to directly oversee quality standards. We do not directly audit. We also do not have a role in setting forward scheme policy, though we will, of course, work closely with government on that.
So the principal role on quality control was taken out of Ofgem and given to TrustMark.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have, between you beautifully confirmed the NAO report, paragraph 21.2, the government created an overly complex system that ultimately failed, and naming DESNZ, Ofgem, TrustMark and UKAS, and this fragmentation and confusion over responsibilities and accountabilities. I suppose the question that follows is, have you learned from this? Have you changed the system of responsibilities and accountabilities? Are we going to get clarity here? I mean, it's not just true of this scheme. This is one of the big problems my committee comes across again, Chair, with the energy system, by the way. So many different organisations and nobody understands who's responsible for what. But have you sorted this out on this in this space? Not least because consumers need confidence to engage with government on future schemes, as well as dealing with the follow-ups for this.
I'll hand over to my colleague Clive on.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, thank you. I mean, firstly, I'd say what the department has been working with all the parties involved in this to be making incremental improvements to the system that's here. That's allowed those installers to get on with the remediation of work in the way that Jeremy has set out already, and we can go through those in more detail. I think you're focusing mostly, though, on what changes might be required for the future. On that, ministers have been clear that the system we have at the moment is not good enough. They believe that there needs to be that consumer protection needs to be taken more seriously, and they've set out 3 principles for any future reform of the system. Firstly, to make sure that it is simpler and it is clearer. Second, to make sure that there is stronger central oversight, much stronger expectation of getting things right first time, and with appropriate sanctions. And third, to have real accountability when things go wrong in the form of clear redress and remediation. So those are the goals that the government is going to be working on.
Okay, all very laudable. Is that what we can expect for the continuation of the existing schemes and for the Warm Homes Plan?
Government has said that ministers have said that they will set out the details of that new scheme in the Warm Homes Plan. As for the continuation of the existing scheme, that needs to be done within the regulatory framework that is here at the moment. So it's about making changes in the way, for example, that data is handled and the way that the organisations involved are cooperating and working together.
That doesn't sound terribly encouraging. If we've got the existing problems and they're hardwired in.
There are a couple of quite important but maybe detailed changes that have been made. So we mentioned earlier the role of a really key party to this is the retrofit coordinator. And the idea of this came from the Each Home Counts. This individual is the person that ultimately takes responsibility for looking at the design that's produced and then overseeing the installation of the multi-measured approach, because this was a real recognition that going from individual measures to multiple measures actually is a very different undertaking. And so this was a really sensible suggestion. We implemented this, and it's part of the regime that you've heard about. One of the things that actually has come out, two of the things that came out, is that this role really as part of this has failed us ultimately. Let's be clear, we all share in some of that, but this role particularly. So one of the changes we've made is that this role must now visit every time on site to be sure that the design that they're signing off will work in an individual property. You might be shocked that was not required before. Okay. I thought you would say that.
Strangely enough, we are.
Yes, to accept that, I would agree with you. That has now been changed. So as of March, that is now absolutely required. So I appreciate none of this is good news, but hopefully it illustrates that. And even though it's a small change, it makes a big difference, because each house then has to have been individually seen before that design is signed off.
And you're confident that the support for the individual person who's carrying out this accreditation, certification process, is also being assessed adequately as well?
Do you mean the surveyor, or is that what you're talking? So
we talk about surveyors doing the work.
No, sorry, the installers, the retrofit installers. So on the retrofit installers, as I mentioned earlier, that the shift that we're trying to make there, because ultimately it is their work on the ground that is faulty, and we have repeatedly said that. But I'm just trying to illustrate that. So where we're working with them was through the suspensions and then the reinstatement process, and there's a very robust reinstatement process. And then the change to the retrofit coordinator role, which is then going to reinforce the quality at the design stage. And there are a number of other small incremental changes that Clive has explained, which don't obviously reform the entire system, but give us incremental confidence in the individual parts. And ultimately that, plus two big things that I would add, is engagement across the entire system, which I mentioned earlier, is fundamental to this. I think that was mentioned in the earlier panel, because everybody working together to share information and to share data means that then we are informed and collectively can make more informed decisions. Really fundamental. And then the oversight that we've now got through TrustMark.
Can I just add one other thing, if I can? Of course, the other thing that was alluded to earlier, but just is an important part of tightening up the current system, is TrustMark have suspended 38 installers. They set out a robust 6-point plan for those installers to, if you like, to be reintroduced back into the scheme. That included fixing their problems, being on track to do that, and getting their systems in place. 22, I think it is, of the 38 have been reintroduced into the scheme. So the system is tightening up, but it needs to be fundamentally reformed for the future, and we're absolutely clear about that.
Although, of course, it subsequently emerged that nearly every installation of external wall insulation was inadequate. So the scale of this was much bigger than initially.
But the suspensions happened after that discovery.
I think after the discovery that it was 98.
Well, very clear. The escalation
after the scale. Sorry, after the scale of the problem became visible, but yes, before the fully representative sample work was undertaken.
The decision to suspend was taken earlier, and that decision was taken to suspend 81% of the market.
We heard in the first panel, though, that there's a difference between the organisations being suspended and the individual installers. How have you managed? How have you tightened? What assurance can you give that it won't just be the organisations, but the individual installers that they contract with, some of whom aren't directly employed?
I would just say that it's the lead installer that has to take responsibility for the work, whether they subcontract it or not.
And then the certification process covers it. Right. One final question, Chair, from me for now anyway. I think this is probably a question for Kiera Schoenemann. this issue about the short-term nature of schemes, the changes in schemes, and whether it enabled substandard installers to enter the market in large numbers because money needed to be used up at the end of the scheme period. Have you identified this? It's certainly something that came to my select committee.
I just need to make sure I've understood the question. So it's about whether installers are coming into the market, the phoenixing issue that we spoke about.
Not phoenixing as such, but whether to use the money up in the scheme period, it attracted people who weren't up to the job, and effectively we saw cowboy installers coming in spite of the accreditation process.
So certainly, I guess on your cowboy comment, certainly we've heard from the consumers who have contacted our help centre that is something that they've experienced in some instances. I think on incentives and timing and pace of delivery, I'm not sure that necessarily directly follows that poor quality will occur. Indeed, many installations have occurred to very high standards. I think what is important, if I just take a stand back, if your question is why or how did this happen, I would probably point to four things. So one is the importance of a really clear incentive framework throughout the supply chain where there's consequences where bad things happen, and catching that and detecting that at an early stage. A robust audit program supports that, and then it can sort of speak about the importance of clear resolution paths and consolidated oversight as well. Might not directly answer your question.
Look, suppliers back-ending their obligation. Do you mean so rushing to get measures installed?
Suppliers who, a lot of installers weren't doing an adequate job. One of the reasons being that it attracted installers who probably weren't properly qualified, attracted by the funds available in a short period of time. Now, this has come from industry who say, look, if we've got longer time periods, it will give us certainty to gear up, to train properly, and that will reduce the likelihood that you end up with substandard installations.
I think I would go back to the incentives and the oversight around this. So I think the pace, I don't know that there is a time pressure as such that is driving this, if that's the direct answer to your question.
Right, thank you.
I'll just come in. I think to the extent that might be a problem, I think we heard earlier from colleagues from TrustMark that they are doing more intensive auditing of new firms that join their registers. So, I mean, that would help to mitigate that if that were a risk.
Right. Thanks, Chair.
Secretary, I've been listening to this line of questioning. I think one of the important things we need to get out of this hearing today is that paragraph 1.3 on page 16 makes it clear that you are currently considering extending this scheme by 6 to 9 months. It would be unforgivable to extend the scheme and create even more defect problems. Can we be absolutely assured that if you put advice to ministers that you want to extend this scheme, that you will have a system that is sufficiently robust that wherever possible, whatever can be done possibly will avoid the problems that this scheme has got?
The extension of the scheme is a future policy matter for ministers. I can't comment on that.
I'm asking what your advice would be
for the committee. Of course, we need to make sure that the system is robust in order to protect consumers, and that is both the system that would operate for an extension and the permanent future system that would need to be. So that is absolutely something that the department is focused on.
Thank you.
Is it worth just adding that to be really clear about this, our advice, and I think we've put a consultation out, so I think members of your committee might have seen the consultation. So this is not something that we are doing sort of internally. We have consulted, and industry has provided some really useful feedback, and I think the general consensus is that much of the work has actually been completed, but not all, and so the extension would afford a window to complete the obligations without us stipulating specifically any new obligations.
So can I just, we're running well behind time, just ask you to let us have a note what measures you still need to put in place if you were to extend this scheme. Thank you very much. Clive Betts.
Yes, just to follow a couple of points which might be things you would look at. We mentioned already the competence of the companies that do the work, and it's been explained, well, actually they can subcontract to a company that isn't competent. And there's no check on the workers who go into a house to do the work, whether they're competent. So is that something that causes you concern? That the competence can be the label put on a director who never visits the site, and the people on the site actually are not good at their job, no skills, not the right skills, and do a bad job. Isn't that something that needs rectifying in any scheme?
I don't want to rule anything in or out in this hearing with sort of ideas and sort of recommendations from the committee. The regime at the moment does operate at the company level, which we've heard about, but there is also a competent persons regime as well, which it overlaps with as well, which applies not to government schemes but more broadly. I don't know.
Yeah.
To just
I mean, that's about being able to self-certify of works rather than seek permission. So there are levels of certification, but you're quite right, and as the Permanent Secretary has said, the accreditation is done at a corporate level, which is the point you're making, I think. Yeah.
Competent person scheme applies to the person in charge of the company, not the person doing the work.
Exactly that. So it's done at the company, essentially, the lead level. You're quite right. The kind of specific individual level oversight is something that we are particularly looking at for our future system reform, and what more we could be doing at an individual level, because as it stands today, it is very much done at a company level, noting, of course, that there is responsibility on that company for those individuals that they employ. So these are not individuals who will just have no responsibility and accountability, because ultimately they are under employment. So there is at minimum an employment contract in play.
Okay, maybe something we come back to, but the other problem that seems to need to be addressed is assessors and coordinators, who are meant to be checking and looking at things that are done properly, can be actually appointed by the company they're assessing. I mean, this can't be right, can it?
So there isn't sufficient independence. Is the challenge that we've got. So I completely understand where you've raised that issue, Mr. Betts. That was the arrangements that were put into place under the PAS 2035, if I've got the number correct. That's the arrangements under the PAS, the relevant PAS standard. But there is not sufficient independence between the different parties.
You know what happens, isn't it? You get a job, you don't give me a hard time, I'll give you another job. Yeah, it's not acceptable. Just one, given the department seems to be accepting, I think, responsibility overall for the scheme, are you really accepting responsibility to ensuring that everybody who's been badly treated by this and other schemes that the department's run is going to be put right, and the department will see that they get proper rectification and restitution?
Our focus today is this scheme, and what we're doing to put right the problems that have been created by this scheme. And I think that's the right focus. I think there are then other schemes as well. Some of them are in the report, some of them are other historic schemes, which we can come on to, where there are systems in place to oversee them. Obviously, as schemes get more historic, the schemes were not as...
Yeah, but what are you asking? Is the department in the end the fallback for this? Because now I've got a constituent, I want to go into all the details of a scheme under the boiler replacement scheme, who's been run round in circles, from the installer that's now gone bust, to the supplier of the heat pump, to TrustMark, to the department. They've still got a heat pump that doesn't work. The restitution they've been offered is they've been told they can have a gas boiler as well to boost the heat in the house. I mean, what a nonsense. And nobody seems to accept responsibility. I'm worrying this scheme as well, in the end, it'll be, pass the buck around as we track to rectification, and no one in the end will end up responsible. Is the department going to be that last person?
It's very hard for me to comment on individual cases. Well, obviously, my sympathies are with your constituent on that. But if you write to the department about that, very happy to look into that. I can't give you an absolute blanket guarantee, because that's not
Well, I'll write you out, Mr. and Mrs. Henry Smith, certainly, but I was trying to get to the principle. In the end, on these schemes, can the public get an assurance that where it's a government scheme, a government-backed scheme, that the government in the end will stand behind them and ensure that right is done for them?
Our responsibility is to ensure that the schemes that we put in place operate effectively and that there is appropriate system of sort of consumer protection, in place.
Thanks very much, Clive. Anna Dixon, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and to our witnesses. So you, I think, heard the previous panel where we were led to believe that there were already concerns being raised in late 2022. And I think looking at the timeline in figure 5 on page 27, it really doesn't seem that this problem was properly gripped and anything really done about it until late 2024. So why did it take so long to realise that poor quality insulation was going on?
Thank you. A very important question. Can I please address it? I want to address it in parts. First of all, the timing issue, and then what did the department know? First of all, the timing issue. Eco 4 delivery began in July 2022. Like other supplier obligations, but particularly so reflecting it was new, it started slowly. And these supplier obligations do not have an annual target because it takes time for supply chains to form. So it started slowly, and that would have happened particularly so for more complicated measures like external wall. The department also thinks there's quite a strong seasonal factor here. External wall is generally not installed over the middle of winter, and actually the ramp up would really have begun in spring 2023. Would have been the weather window when you'd have seen more of this activity taking place, and actually the problems would have not become visible until the autumn winter that followed that. So there is a lead path here that is that is part of the explanation, but it is clear that the systems of oversight were not in place and were not adequate. I think TrustMark have talked about that in the previous hearing. The audit and oversight and the data management was not operating in the way that it needed to particularly with that benefit of hindsight, but also I think in advance as well.
But if I may, I mean, you've been around housing and energy for a lot of your career. I mean, these issues more generally were sort of widely known even before this scheme started, that these were quite complicated things to do, that if they weren't done well, they could lead to damp and mould. You know, I'm a layperson, like that's something that we know, that particularly with cavity wall, I know less about external wall. So how is it possible that, you know, this scheme was well underway even under your timelines in sort of early 2023, and there was no actual auditing going on? These should have been seen as like high risk, whether these have been doing right or not. And between then and actual action being taken, I mean, how many households, you know, had faulty, well, I mean, we know it's nearly, 98% of them. So let's just, we're talking, tens of thousands of households who in that time had faulty work done without any checks basically taking place.
There were checks taking place through this period. The problem is the intelligence information was not being brought together at different levels and not being escalated in the way that it should have been. There were also not enough checks taking place, but it's not correct to say there were no checks taking place. They were not adequate.
So if every one of those
not adequate checks,
finding that there were problems, because obviously these later audits have found that there was 98%. So even if there was like a dozen being done in those early days of July 2022, when this scheme, was getting up and running, if the pattern was that every one of them pretty much was faulty, surely there was some red lights, already and discussions
That
happening.
should have been escalated more quickly, including to the department. As set out in the report, to the best of my knowledge, the department was not made aware that there was a systemic material problem until October with non-compliance. There's a fraud, but non-compliance until October 2024. Maybe in September we were aware that this conversation might be coming, but it's not until October 2024. Yes, with hindsight, we should have been more questioning as well. I've already said that. But having looked at the paperwork again, preparing for this committee, in terms of sort of a material concern, that's when it happens, and that's what is in the NAO report.
Actually, I'd like you to think about that answer.
Yeah.
Because we heard from the previous witnesses that they did, on these working groups, inform you towards the end of 2022 that there was a problem. So what action did you take as a result when you heard that there was that problem?
So I chose the word material deliberately there, Sir Geoffrey. What I'd like to do, I'd look again. I'm giving you the answer to the best of my knowledge based on the information that I have, obviously prepared for the hearing, but I'm very happy to look again at the paperwork just to see what evidence there is of what's happening in that period. We did supply all the paperwork we have to the NAO for the report, and I think that it's a very serious report. This is a very serious report, but one thing we have done is responded very openly and transparently once we've identified the problems.
I accept that, but the witnesses, particularly the witness from TrustMark, did make it clear, but he also made it clear there may not be minutes, but he's going to give us the information.
We should.
Can you make sure we'll ask them to give you the same information?
We should obviously review that.
Yeah. Thank you.
And can I just press though? I mean, I think you're agreeing there that this should have been. It's all with hindsight. Should have known earlier. There should have been better information sharing. But between the time that this scheme got up and running, early indications, which are yet obviously to be shared with us in follow-up correspondence, that there was knowledge somewhere in this system from as early as late 2022 to the point where action was then materially understood by DESNZ to be of significance to take action. How much money was spent and how many properties, have had faulty insulation in that time?
I haven't got more that I can add. I'm very happy to write on that. Yeah. On that issue, the data on how many properties is in the report. I haven't got a specific timeline of how many properties are installed or what measures are installed by exactly what date.
Just trying to get to really the scale that had something been done better and earlier, it could have prevented many thousands and thousands of households, having work that is now going to cost thousands more for remediation. And I think it's just to get the scale of the failure to identify this early enough. And I do press, why was it not that from previous schemes from the private sector not seen to be higher risk from the outset? And I don't know if that is for you, Permanent Secretary, or for your team to answer.
Shall I just say something that Jeremy come back to something Jeremy mentioned earlier, which was about the change to make this a whole house sort of approach to the way in which retrofit was being looked at. In addition to the work that TrustMark was doing about auditing and collecting the data about the whole house activities, those certification bodies were also looking at the installers. Their data from the same period, I think, shows much lower failure rates than the ones that TrustMark had. If you had triangulated and used that data through this period, and certainly even in 2024 and late 2024, when we were looking at the data coming from those certification bodies, it showed much less of a problem than the problem here. So there was something about looking at the approach to installers who are used to doing single measures, and then looking at the greater complexity of doing a whole house job, and not necessarily appreciating some of the different challenges, both technically and in terms of the way the standards work together. And I know that's a very technical answer, but I'm afraid I think it's at heart of some of the differences and why it took, for example, those certification bodies and TrustMark working together. Firstly, their relationship wasn't working as it should, but also they were using some different standards and weren't comparing like with like properly.
I'm afraid we need to move on. I'm really sorry. Catherine.
So that begs the question, why wasn't a fraud risk assessment carried out? in order to identify that?
I'll just clarify one point, and I think probably our colleagues from Ofgem would be happy to come in, but just clarify one point. Obviously, fraud and error are possibly on a spectrum, but distinct. So the non-compliance is about clear mistakes. The fraud is, as you say, about a risk assessment. I think the report calls out that while we had done an initial fraud impact assessment during the Eco4 policy stage, we did not complete the full fraud risk assessment before it was implemented. This is not an excuse. At that point, it wasn't a mandatory requirement, so it wasn't that we failed to tick a box per se. We were completing that fraud risk assessment. We had, however, not completed it at the point it went in, and we are clear that that is accurate, and the report is accurate. We do now have a fully completed fraud risk assessment with owners very clearly allocated and identified, and it is actively managed. So I can give you that assurance from a departmental perspective. I know colleagues in Ofgem will possibly, and colleagues here may want to pick up on the fraud.
I just asked from when? From what date is that?
In terms of actually having it with all the owners assigned, as the NAO report calls out, that has only recently been completed. So the last owners were assigned in October this year. That's the specific owners. The risks had been identified.
I just want to stop you. You can come back in a minute. Can we be absolutely clear that the Treasury's rules on managing public money now do require all new schemes like this, so that are novel and contentious, should have a fraud assessment in them? And can we make that loud and clear from this committee this morning that this is a really important matter?
And we're very clear about that.
I just assure you, as Permanent Secretary, I wholeheartedly agree.
Thank you.
So I think there seems to be a general pattern of a lack of foresight, and obviously with hindsight that's always easy to say, but I think there are some really obvious issues that have arisen here, and the acknowledgement that this was a much bigger and broader and more complex scheme than anything that had been undertaken previously. So I just want to ask again about the fraud. Given that the risk assessment had not been undertaken in advance of the scheme being rolled out, and as far as I can see, TrustMark were given responsibility for overseeing fraud within the system. Would that be a fair assessment?
I'll start by saying clearly there wasn't sufficient preparation and oversight, and I think there was a failure to understand fully some of that fraud exposure at the start of this. I think we have a number of parties who've got roles to play in this. Clearly, businesses in the first place shouldn't be breaking the law. They shouldn't be committing fraud. Those certification bodies and the like also need to be making sure that the businesses that they're giving certificates to are behaving lawfully. Ofgem has a role to play in dealing with fraud, and indeed in exempting or sort of avoiding measures that are claimed which turn out not to be correct. And the department has a role here to make sure the whole system is being designed effectively. Once we got information from TrustMark about potential fraud, we took early action. We certainly have sorted out the framework that we've talked about. We've brought in different expertise. So we brought in the Public Sector Fraud Authority.
So this we know because it's set out in the report. I think what we need to understand, and what the fundamental question is, why wasn't that done before?
So we did do an initial fraud assessment, so that was done. The thing that we did not do was complete the full fraud risk assessment prior to launching the scheme. That was then completed.
Can you say why?
As I say at the time, for good or for bad, it wasn't on our kind of, it wasn't a mandatory requirement. Chair, you're quite right, it then subsequently became such. It wasn't at the time. And then we worked with that, with what we had, and we completed the assessment. What we didn't complete, and it's in the report, is allocating all the ownership. Could I just to come back on ownership, there are multiple parties with responsibilities for fraud. There is not one body who is overall responsible for fraud. And again, you may criticise that comment, but it is by design, so I think it would be inappropriate to say that TrustMark are responsible for fraud, which I appreciate you are asking the question. I just wanted to say it would be inappropriate for me to say that it is them that are responsible for fraud.
I think fundamentally the question is, and the scheme was established in an arm's length way. It was established with the what we now see as, and has been accepted as, too layered, too fragmented, too opaque in terms of a system. And I think it's all well and good to learn lessons now, and I think Anna set out very clearly the impact on households of this. But I think it'd be helpful to understand why it was set up in that way. I think for people to understand why we have ended up where we are and to really learn the lessons from this. And that's what I'm trying to understand.
So, and we can sort of outline our role in fraud specifically, which is to investigate when it's reported to us. I mean, I think, Ofgem used to be involved in schemes like this, and look, I accept the point that these are really complex measures to oversee and deliver. I mean, ultimately, the department led the design of the scheme, and the department made the decisions around how to assess the fraud. But I completely accept the point. This is a very, very complex supply chain.
It is a question for the department. Why was it set up like that, in such a way that there was so little oversight that we now end up in this position?
I think I've tried to answer that to the best of my understanding. This is now, it's actually cumulative decisions over the best part of over a decade, really, get us to this point. I think ultimately, if you want, can I make it sort of forward-facing? What are the real lessons for the future, actually, rather than to try and sort of unpack too much on motivations, that we can come back to that, which is it's about the volume of change that you're doing at the same time is the sort of, for me, the real lesson here. It's the combination of changing the oversight consumer protection regime and moving to a more complicated set of interventions around Eco4, those things happening basically at the same time is ultimately the problem. If you had done one or the other, you might well have had a different outcome. But they may look like they're over a long period, but actually there's too much change in the system, often introduced with good intentions and for sound policy reasons, happening too quickly is the root cause of the problem that we have. On your specific question on the fragmented system and why figure 4 in the report looks like it does, I think you have to go back to the Each Home Counts review, 2016, which is when that approach was set out. I think that was introduced with good intentions, as I say. It was designed to have a single quality mark, was the sort of the concept behind that. That was a role that, with work with an industry panel, that role was given to TrustMark. But ultimately, the system there, essentially based on licensing and certification, parallels the system we have UKAS accreditation and certification, that creates a very layered, complicated system that we have. I think if you had UKAS here, they would say that can work in some sectors. I think it can't work in every sector, and it doesn't work when you're dealing with measures as complicated as we have with Eco4.
Deborah, I think you want to just
tiny bit I'd add on the fraud point. I think there are some it's fair to say that we didn't have the thing fully signed off in place. However, I think you'll find that actually through the course of the scheme, fraud has been identified and action has been taken, and where fraud is identified and confirmed as such, then energy suppliers are no longer allowed to claim that, as you'd expect. Those measures are then rejected from the obligation, and the energy supplier is required to then complete further work to actually complete their required obligation amount. So to be clear, we have identified some fraud in the system. I think that's a positive thing to say because the system has identified the fraud. So you know that, we all know there is fraud across everything.
Is it deemed to be at an acceptable level?
So at the present time, the levels of fraud that is identified, and I'll defer to Kiera. Kiera?
Yeah, so to date we've rejected measures worth £6.7 million, not billion, that would be a lot, valued at 0.15% of the scheme value. We intend to reject measures worth 1.75%. That is in train, that is below the departmental threshold of 2%. Clearly, if any more fraud is identified, we will obviously reject that.
So I think there's just one final question, because this fraud issue is so serious, and it's unlikely that this level of failure would just happen on its own. It's more likely that there is a level of fraud in it. Mr. Brearley, I heard your answer very clearly. You said where, as I recall it, where fraud is brought to our attention, we will investigate. That sounds rather passive to me. I want an assurance from both of you that you will not just stand by and wait for accusations of fraud come to you. You will actively go out there and look at it. The scale of the failure of this scheme, I come back to where I started, is so unprecedented that I think you should be really, really actively looking for this fraud.
May I take that? So Ofgem can only reject measures where we have evidence. So we do not have a legislative role nor the ability to detect fraud across the system in its entirety. To that, if I think about how we act on our other schemes, that's supported by us running a audit program, for example, statistical or targeted. That's what gives evidence to find and detect and reject fraud. I explained the role of Ofgem earlier. We will always act where we can, and
I get your statutory limitations. There's not a lot we can do this. So, Permanent Secretary, you can do something about this. Yes, second Permanent Secretary.
Can I reassure you? I mean, the department is doing everything it can to make sure it's bringing together the parties who might well have information that would allow Ofgem to identify cases of potential fraud. So we're working with TrustMark and using their data. They have, for example, introduced different software systems that allow them, using the data that they hold, to identify cases that they have high suspicions might be fraudulent in some way based on the scoring and things like that of their systems. So they're doing things like that. We're also making sure that we can share data, for example, around the households and their likely eligibility for these sorts of measures and things, again to allow sort of connections to be made, and indeed sharing data about energy performance certificates, which also enhances the effectiveness of TrustMark and others in looking for potential fraud cases. So we are bringing people together the best we can to identify those sorts of cases.
Okay, thank you.
Chair, sorry, just to add that there's plenty we are doing to support the department to resolve this problem that's beyond our role, so we're open to them coming back to us.
Okay, well, we will probably want, as a committee, to come back to this at some stage, but for now, let's leave that aspect. Sarah Heath, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move us on to the government's plans to fix the faulty installations, and figure 10 of the report estimates that there's over 30,000 homes that have major issues still to be remediated. And my question to you, Clive and Deborah, if I may, is how the department will scale up the operations to identify and fix those homes with major issues that still need to be remediated.
Yeah. Shall I say a few words first? I mean, I think that the first challenge actually is to identify the homes. The estimates of the numbers of homes affected that are contained in this report are based, of course, on sampling and then estimating how large a proportion of the population of homes affected. We now need to find those homes. We're really keen that any householders who have had external wall insulation undertaken under these schemes get in touch, and we've made a commitment to them getting audits to help identify all of them.
How would they know that they should get in touch? Are you proactively contacting them?
We're proactively writing to every single household that has had any form of external wall insulation under both Eco4 and GBOS.
And is it one letter? Is it a phone call? Like how proactive are you being?
So interesting that you asked that question. So we will initially send a letter.
Yeah.
It will be on our website, so there's backup with details of contact centres. We are then working really closely with TrustMark. You probably recall Simon Ayers mentioned earlier. The external wall insulation through Eco4 is very concentrated, principally geographically, in about 7 key areas. So our approach is going to be very targeted in those areas. So we will be writing to the councils and the MPs of those areas, and then we will be engaging in a community way in those local areas to actively encourage those individuals that would have had external wall to come forward and allow us to go into their homes to do an audit. So it is very difficult, and you're right, it's really difficult to know the most effective mechanism to communicate with these individuals. We don't always have phone numbers. Where we've got phone numbers, we can use those techniques as well. We don't necessarily always have that information because you'll be aware this is done through the supply chain. But we will using the engagement and outreach. I'm very clear has to be the most effective mechanism that we've got.
So if it's concentrated in specific parts of the country, does that
Yes.
mean that you intend to use the local media as well as part of that, rather than...
We're very open to using any local outreach that's available to us.
How long do you think it's going to take to identify and fix this? What's the timescale you're currently guesstimating? And it can only be a guesstimate, I appreciate.
We know that we could run audits, so we're scaling up to have the capacity to run the audits. Simon mentioned, and our current working assumption is it will take us 12 to 15 months to complete all of those audits should we get the take-up from people, because quite obviously it is entirely dependent on people allowing us into their homes.
That's just to identify them?
Yep. Well, no, that's to complete the audits, having sent the letters. The letters are ready to go.
It won't have fixed the problem.
Yeah, but it's worth saying that when audits discover a problem,
yes.
there is then a set timetable under which the installer has to go and rectify and remedy problems. I think it's 12 weeks plus a 4-week.
So it's 8 weeks is the guidance plus 4 weeks, so you got your 12 weeks. Well done. And of course, where in the instances that we do need to invoke a guarantor, that will of course add some time on. But yes, so that window is known because that's what we monitor.
If you were in front of this committee in 18 months' time,
yeah,
most of this will have been resolved by then.
A lot of this will have been resolved.
But I think the really big caveat I should put down is that this is very dependent on the households being willing to have audits done of their homes. Yeah. And we clearly can't force people to do that. Yeah. We don't have control over that bit of the process.
Can I clarify something you said, Deborah, please? I don't know whether you meant to restrict it just to exterior insulation, but are there other aspects of the scheme? We know there's large numbers of houses out there that have got problems with interior insulation, so will it apply to all aspects of the scheme?
So what we're doing specifically here is for the external wall, we're doing this 100% audit offer, principally because, as we mentioned earlier, I mean 98% is nearly 100, right? So we are therefore committed to offering it to everybody. If anybody, so two things, Chair, we continue to run anyway BAU audits, both the certification bodies and TrustMark. So that continues. So we will continue to audit internal wall and other installations as a matter of course. Plus, we have encouraged, and we've written to all those that had internal wall as well already, and we have encouraged them to contact us should they consider that they have a particular issue with their insulation. And we continue to extend that offer, that if anybody considers they have a problem, they should contact their installer in the first instance, they should contact their certification body, they can contact the contact centre that we've set up. And we've had a process where we've demonstrated that we can triage calls that come through and get an audit then undertaken immediately for those cases where it was necessary.
Sarah, what's come back?
Follow up. How would they know they have a problem? Because in some instances it won't have presented itself yet.
Yeah, I mean you're quite right, and so this is the difficulty. However, we are saying if anybody feels that they have a problem, to be honest, they will, if they've got damp and mould, they will know they've got damp and mould. That's,
If I may just come in from our consumer survey, from
Yes.
those who have contacted our helpline, what they've told us is where they have had issues, they actually have presented themselves very, very quickly, and they also have had concerns from the outset. So I think generally we would expect where they have concerns, they will manifest pretty quickly.
Well, can I challenge that? And I was going to actually come back to Deborah on this. Some of the hidden defects, things like inadequate ventilation, which could lead to excess build-up of CO2, bare wires, some of the things we've heard about in the report. are really, really serious, just as serious as the external insulation problem. So can we be sure that whatever you're all doing, you are encouraging people to be vigilant for these defects and to immediately report them when they find them?
Yes, absolutely right.
Just to clarify that the wording that you're using isn't going to actively discourage people from coming forward because they don't think they've got a problem.
No, I hope not. That is not the intention. We've spent quite a lot of time on the wording, but actually Kiera and I were just talking. We've got behavioural insight teams, both in Ofgem and in our department, and we're planning to engage with them to make sure that we're using the right wording to maximise the effectiveness of the communications.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I should perhaps, bearing in mind the recent question, just to doubly declare that I am a member of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. Anna Dixon, please.
Yeah, thank you. It's pleasing to hear that you've already written to those who've had internal wall insulation and you intend to do that for external and do other publicity. But as I mentioned in the first panel, I have a number of constituents who had cavity wall insulation fitted under Eco4 who knew it was faulty, and they had lawyers knocking door to door to find them. So, if you're saying you're writing a letter, and what these people did find was a lot of people who were very unhappy with the shoddy work, and promised them that they would represent them on a no-win, no-fee basis to make claims against the installers who should be certified by TrustMark under this scheme. Unfortunately, those law firms like SSB Law then collapsed, and it's the construction firms, companies, insurers are now countersuing for legal costs. So in addition to the distress that we know many households are facing of having faulty insulation, these are victims again to exploitative law firms. So they continue. I mean, the evidence this committee's received from the victim support group, SSB Law Victim Support Group, continuing distress, deteriorating living conditions, now in addition unresolved debt and fear of enforcement action. You obviously, Deborah, talked about how you're working with these cases, very close case management for the 20,000 plus. Could I please seek some assurance that if you're not already, that you would meet with and apply a similar process to helping these victims, not only of the dodgy insulation, but now a second victim to dodgy law firms?
So just to say, if the work was completed under a government scheme the cavity wall will have a guarantee if it was Eco4, that as you suggested it was, there will be a guarantee attached to that product. That is a mandatory requirement for all works under Eco4. So, I really hope that in the first instance your constituents are aware, and some of this might not be because they just aren't aware, that they have, of course, the right to go to the installer. If the installer hasn't rectified the situation and potentially is out of business, then they have the right to invoke the provisions within their guarantee. So I'm very happy to meet with people to talk with them and understand the issues and to possibly understand the procedure that they've gone through to get to where they've got to. We are very aware of the SSB law issue. That's clearly a very specific case, and the Solicitors Regulation Authority is dealing with that to the best of my knowledge. So I know there's a specific provision being made for those who may have been caught up in the SSB law problem. So I think that's probably quite discreet, but again, we can take that one away.
These are specifically under schemes like including Eco4. So I think the problem is they got caught out between your remedies coming in and them experiencing the faulty installations, and so they've been caught by this.
Please do send the details through, and we will absolutely look at those.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Rupert Lowe, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a question for Mr. Pocklington. I see from your CV that you were in charge of financial regulation for some time. In the early 90s, you must have presided over FSMA 2000 as part of your brief. The London market is now a shadow of its former self, having been over-regulated. Listening to this hearing and also reading the report, it seems to me this is another systemic failure. of what I would call a government department. I mean, do you agree with that?
Just on a point of fact, as you asked, I have very, very limited experience in dealing with financial regulation. That's not my background. My first role in the civil service was financial regulation, but I haven't been involved since, just as a sort of point of fact. So I don't want to, I can't talk too much about that.
You think this
sector.
is a systemic
but
failure?
I do think there are serious failings at every level of the system that are systemic here. So
right.
That's my view.
So for me, just listening, the key issue here is Mr. Ayers mentioned the fact you had various meetings in 2022, which he didn't think were minuted, but he has got the agenda for those meetings. Now, have you got the minutes for those meetings? In my experience of government, Mr. Pocklington, most things are minuted to the nth degree. So did your department not minute those meetings?
I don't have any more information to give the committee on that. We gave all the paperwork that we have to the NAO, but I think I've already committed to double check what the record shows about those.
I think our committee would like to see whatever minutes you have got. It would be unprofessional and in my view, irregular not to have minutes of meetings which are held. So I think we should see those, Chairman. Also, I've heard you mentioning, you've referred to guarantees rather than insurers, I think. Can the committee understand whether these insurers or indeed guarantors that you've mentioned, are they FCA regulated insurers or are they not FCA registered? We've already heard from Mr. Ayers that potentially downstream health issues arising from mould may not be covered under these policies. He's going to check that for us. So can we be absolutely clear exactly whether we're talking about insurers, whether we're talking about guarantees, exactly what are we talking about and are they properly regulated?
My understanding, and I'm happy to write to you just to confirm this, is that of the three organisations mentioned by Mr. Ayers, that they have a variety of different business models and some take the form of insurance type guarantees and some take the form of other types of warranty arrangements.
Yes. Have you reviewed the balance sheets of these insurers or guarantors?
As Mr. Ayers explained, there is a panel involving financial experts who are put in place to make sure that any of the arrangements, the guarantee arrangements being used by approved installers were fit for purpose. And
I'm always wary of experts. It's better if principals deal with it, isn't it? Have you reviewed it? Has your department reviewed it?
So the department has conferred responsibility for this to the Financial Protection Panel, has its own independent chair, so Brian Gregory, I think, is the lead for that panel. So he takes that responsibility on our behalf, and to our best understanding has, it takes that. We speak with Brian, so I've personally met with Brian several times over the course of the last few months. And I know he takes his responsibilities incredibly seriously, and it is him and his panel's responsibility to ensure that these products are fit for purpose.
It does strike me that there's too many people involved in this chain, and I think it was made clear earlier that this scheme was over complex and needed to be in many ways reformed and reviewed. So, I mean, it does seem to me that it's a case of too many cooks spoiling the broth and nobody's prepared to take responsibility. So, again, that must fall at you are ultimately the permanent secretary, Mr. Pocklington. So,
I've already said in this hearing that I think the scheme is oversight of it is too fragmented and there are too many layers, which is not suitable in this sector. I don't want to say that approach to standards might not work in other sectors, but in this sector, for this scheme, we need to reform this for the future. I'm being clear today, our ministers are also being clear on that.
Thank you.
Clive, please.
Right. So we're going to rectify all these problems that have been created. What happens when the household says, well, they made such a mess of my house, I'm not having the same people back?
May I come in? I mean, the arrangements for the warranties or guarantees also provide for circumstances where the installer is unable, for some reason, or is unable to do the job in a way that the householder wants them to. That's acceptable.
To enable, the household just says, I'm not having them back.
Yeah, so you are quite right that there are cases of that. So working with TrustMark, particularly for this Find and Fix programme, where TrustMark will be establishing a relationship with each of those households that are affected, that are having an audit, we will be helping to reassure if remediation is required, reassure the household that this installer is appropriately accredited, has the appropriate, therefore, ability to do the job, and that actually we will then, of course, check that the job is done properly from a remediation perspective. So that will be our primary route, will be to provide that level of assurance to the household. I accept that in some cases the household may refuse, and we will endeavour to work within that, and if we can work with the certification body affected or other to establish whether we can use an alternative installer, then we will do that if we have to. But we will attempt to, in the first instance, use the installer that first visited the property.
You will do that in the situation. You won't leave somebody with that bad work done and not rectified simply because they won't have them back who's done it wrong in the first place, as people would say.
As I say, we hope that in most cases we can persuade that
individual.
individual.
You'll hope, but I'm trying to deal with the cases where it doesn't happen like that.
Clearly, if the remediation is required, the remediation is required, and we will need to find somebody to do the remediation.
Can I just push one thing about timescales? Now, we talked before, the previous witnesses, Mr. Ayers, about potentially up to 15 months to get to some of these issues, and even audited in some cases. But a priority to the really bad cases, where you've got potential health risk because of damp and mould. I think that's the one that probably is top of everyone's list of things that could be really, maybe other things as well, where the health and safety risk. Now, the government's just brought in Ofgem's law, so social housing providers have to correct such defects within 5 days. Is that the sort of time frame you ought to be insisting on for similar defects with the health risk that arise from this scheme?
So we do have, and this is well understood, that if an audit identifies an issue that is considered to be severe, which is a direct risk to health or safety, then that should be fixed or made safe. And because I say that because there can be a number of potential things, made safe within actually 24 hours, if possible. And I say if possible because clearly you need access to the house to do so. So that is the approach that we take for those most severe cases.
Whose responsibility is it to see that is done?
The certification body will oversee that the installer does that in the event that an audit identifies an issue with a household.
So the certification body is responsible for ensuring that is done.
Well, the installer is responsible for doing it. Let's just be very clear.
Yeah, but we're back to this issue again, aren't we? It's always somebody else or somebody else as well. In the end, if there is an issue there which is a health and safety risk, who is responsible for saying we will make sure that is done?
It should be the scheme provider, the certification body, that makes sure that the installer does it.
Right, that's quite clear.
I believe it's clear, but happy to be challenged.
Okay. Right.
Thank you, Clive. Thank you. Bill Esterson, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just coming back to this 98% failure rate on external wall insulation and 29% on internal. Why are these failure rates so much higher than for other installation of other measures and indeed for other schemes?
I think we've covered that to extent in my sort of answers to other questions. I think at its heart, I think the fuel poverty strategy led to the introduction of whole house retrofit, multi-measures, and in particular external wall insulation is more complicated to introduce, to install than other measures that can benefit energy.
More complicated than installing heat pumps?
It's more complicated than, external wall is more complicated than internal wall insulation, which in turn is more complicated than other measures like double glazing, lagging lofts, for example. That's to sort of just to give you a very broad hierarchy. So this is a more complicated set of measures to get right. The other thing that we've done, sorry, just
all complex technologies, aren't they?
It's more complicated. Just the other thing that we've done is that standard was also raised. So the other factor that I don't think we've really talked about here is that the standard required was also raised in PAS 2035. and that is a higher standard for the installation of these measures. But at its heart, this is a more complicated measure.
Next question: what the standard used to be, given the seriousness of the problems before that?
Do you want to go in, Clive?
No, I mean, I think the other you've asked about the comparison with other types of measures, and Jeremy, I think, talked you through the sort of the hierarchy in terms of complexity. What we are clear about, though, is that sort of external wall insulation can be installed successfully. And I think another interesting comparison is actually looking at the successful installation of a number of other schemes that the government supports, which see significantly lower first-time failure rates, where you've got, for example, different organisational structures and things around it to make sure that things are done.
I mean, having seen solar, battery and heat pump installations, I'm very surprised that they are less complex than external wall.
So just to be clear, if it's helpful to refer back to Eco 3 as a point of comparison, I think what Jeremy said about this being Eco 4 being a multi-measure scheme is really, really key. So the failure rates for EWI, external wall insulation, on Eco 3 were around 11%. And I think a really other key point is around the incentive frameworks and checks that took place. So where that initial failure of 11% was identified, there would be further spot checks following up, and it would be required that was put right at the time. But external wall insulation is not in and of itself, I think, the issue here.
This seems to rather contradict the evidence that Mr. Pocklington just gave us.
No, I think it's aligned. So I think I would support what he said about external wall insulation is one of the most complex measures, but it is not in and of itself the cause of the high failure rate.
Okay, so it's a lack of specialism in a multi-measure installation.
I think that certainly would play a big part.
Right, that's helpful. And then one final thought. My committee heard that we don't have this problem in the gas safety certification, thankfully, system is very, very robust. Is this a model that perhaps should be adopted for measures more widely?
I think, if I may, the comparison to gas is perhaps better made with the sort of microgeneration MCS, which fulfills a similar sorts of roles around checkups on and auditing heat pump installations. That's probably where you've got a more similar sort of technical role that's being supported there. But look, there are, Minister said they want to reform some of these consumer protection arrangements. If there are other models that seem to work well in other bits of the supply chain and other sectors of the economy, we should be looking at those. Yeah.
And I can reassure the panel that we are looking at the Gas Safe Register as a model that has done a good job of overseeing that sector. So that is very much in our list of options that we are considering.
Thank you.
I've got one question for you, Permanent Secretary. You're moving on to another ministry. We've had you before us with various failures on various environmental schemes. What do you take away? What do you reflect on about the catastrophic failure of this scheme? What lessons would you learn and do differently in the future?
I think the key thing here is about, I've referred to this already in the committee hearing, it's about the amount of change and the pace of change that happens in systems such as this. I think, having looked at all of this, quite a lot of this happened before I arrived in the department, which was 2023, so I was not here at the start of this process. But there was too much happening broadly in parallel at a hugely challenging time. First of all, the pandemic. Secondly, the impact of the Ukraine crisis and the huge work that we had on the energy schemes, which I think were overall successful. But I think doing all these things simultaneously is very, very challenging indeed.
I suspect at your next job you'll have even more challenges. But for now, thank you very much indeed to all of our witnesses. We've covered a lot of ground this morning. We will produce in the next few days an uncorrected version of the transcript. Subsequent to that, we will produce a report with recommendations, and we may well return to some aspects, and you've promised to give us certain bits of information as well. So again, thank you all very much for coming this morning. Order, order.